It will be slightly cooler than the weekend, but still on the mild side. Into Tuesday, another fairly grey picture for parts of England and Wales. Risk of some outbreaks of rain in the east. Brighter and drier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. That will sink its way southwards into England and Wales as we go into Wednesday and Thursday.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me in an hour's time, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton. In a few moments' time, we'll be going head-to-head in a clash of minds with Deputy Leader of Reform, Ben Habib. And also former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Looking mean there, Stephen. But before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines with Aaron.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 3 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Israel's ambassador to the US says he's hopeful a significant number of hostages will be released by Hamas in the coming days. His comments come after the Qatari Prime Minister indicated earlier only minor logistical issues stand in the way of a hostage release deal, although Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu insists nothing has been agreed. Qatar, which is home to many Hamas leaders, has played a key role in mediation throughout the conflict. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, 4 have been released, 1's been rescued, and dozens have been killed. The Chancellor says the government is acting responsibly amid suggestions tax cuts will be announced in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News he won't introduce any kind of measure that risks fueling inflation after it was halved over the past year. Now, it's been widely reported cuts to inheritance and income tax are being considered in an effort to boost the economy. But the Chancellor insists next week's statement will focus on growth.
We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly.
Well, Labour have warned cutting inheritance tax while squeezing the welfare system during a cost of living crisis would be wrong. And Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says he wants to know how any cuts will be paid for.
We've said in the Labour Party that we want the tax burden to come down on working people. It's the highest it has been since the Second World War. We've had 25 Conservative tax rises in this Parliament alone, but we can only announce those tax cuts when they can be fully funded. And if the Chancellor is going to announce a tax cut on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how he's been able to get the money to pay for that to happen.
People who are prepared to live near new electricity pylons could stand to benefit by up to £10,000 over a decade. The government is set to announce the move to overcome planning objections and speed up the approval of new energy infrastructure. The current estimate is that it will take 14 years. Homeowners could get £1,000 per year off their household bills, although the Treasury hasn't specified where the money will come from. A woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermakaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and will be deported upon her release from prison. 700,000 pupils in England are still being taught in poorly maintained or potentially unsafe buildings because of crumbling concrete. The Public Accounts Committee says it's limiting students' educational achievements. In its report, the cross-party group described a shocking lack of detail from the Department of Education, meaning the true scale of the crisis remains a mystery. The government says its rebuilding programme is proceeding ahead of schedule. A Conservative MP found guilty of racial abuse has announced he's standing down at the next election. Bob Stewart racially abused a man after telling him to go back to Bahrain outside the Foreign Office last December. He surrendered the Tory whip while appealing against the conviction. The MP for Beckenham made no reference to the recent case, but said it had been an honour and a privilege to serve. Flight restrictions are in place at Heathrow Airport amid strong winds and staff shortages. National Air Traffic Services says it's working to minimise disruption at the UK's busiest airport. There have been reports from angry passengers on social media, with people complaining of long delays and cancellations. Passengers are advised to check with their airline before heading to the airport. Minibuses and electric vehicles have been sent to Albania as part of a deal to return foreign prisoners. The arrangement will see 200 Albanian nationals currently jailed in England and Wales sentenced. The UK has also agreed to help modernise Albania's prison system. The overall deal is expected to cost around £8 million. The government says that will save money for Britain's prisons. We are live across the UK on TV, on digital radio. If you want us on your smart speaker, say play GB News. Now it's back to Nana.
Thank you, Aaron. Good afternoon. If you just joined me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. Coming up, the Chancellor says that the government is acting responsibly over tax cuts ahead of next week's autumn statement. Speaking to Camilla Tominey here on GB News, Jeremy Hunt vowed to show that the UK is on the path to a lower tax economy and promised to promote growth in his statement, but stopped short of explaining how this would be achieved. And then it's time to U-turn on ULEZ. Well, we hope. Apparently, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, misled the public about the benefits of ULEZ in radio and newspaper advertisements, particularly on the extent at which the ULEZ zone would clear up the air quality. Now, that is according to a leaked draft report seen by The Telegraph. So is it time to U-turn on ULEZ? I'll be going head-to-head in a clash of minds with Stephen Pound and Ben Habib in just a moment. Also, do you trust the government to do what it takes to stop the boats? After a damning Supreme Court ruling that the government's Rwanda plan is unlawful, Sunak says that he remains committed to the cause, which could see flights take off by the spring. But do you actually trust him? Do you think they're going to do that, and especially before the next general election? And then, have pro-Palestine protests become a fashion trend? Throughout the last few weeks, we've seen more protesters take to the streets, chanting for Palestine, free Palestine. We've seen from the river to the sea. We've also witnessed pupils in schools across Britain take part in a school strike for Palestine. But do these younger generation actually know exactly what they're protesting for? Or is it actually a classic case of virtue signalling? I'm asking that today. So have pro-Palestine protests become a fashion trend? And then finally, another strike. Yes, should the striking railway workers get back to work? For goodness sake. Train drivers are set to stage a fresh round of strikes as they've announced a rolling programme of walkouts. It's part of more than a year-long dispute over pay that has seen the trade union negotiate with two different prime ministers, with Rishi Sunak being the third. So is it time for them just to get back to work? Coming up, all of that, and then I've got a mystery outside guest. Now, here are some clues that could lead you to him. He is a politician who comes from an important family in British politics, particularly in Northern Ireland. Now, he was named after his father. He's also followed his footsteps, but has made quite a big name for himself, campaigning heavily against cancel culture. Find out at 5. That's all coming up on the show. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. Right, so it's just coming up to 8 minutes after 3 o'clock. I can hear you shouting at the TV as though you know who the outside guest is. You might be wrong.
I think we all know who he is.
No, be quiet. Be quiet. You haven't been introduced yet.
Oh, sorry. Forgive me.
Right, well, now it's time to go head-to-head in a clash of minds with Deputy Leader of the Reform Party, Ben Habib, and also the former MP, Stephen Pound, whose dulcet tones you could hear then.
Dullest is the word you're looking for.
Well, actually, I was being polite.
That's a first.
It is, isn't it? That's quite unusual for me. It must be my new wig. Right, well, let's start with
I wish I could say the same.
Well, I can get you one. I've got plenty of them. You know, should we all vote to get Stephen in one of my wigs?
I could, to be fair, I could do with one.
I think he'd probably quite like it, to be honest. It's not that kind of show, Stephen. But the Chancellor... Let's start with
RuPaul.
Let's start with the first story. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says that economic growth is a priority for the government as we await his fiscal plan next week. Now, Jeremy Hunt says that he won't introduce any kind of measure that risks fuelling inflation after it was halved over the past year, and says that the government will act responsibly amid suggestions that tax cuts will be announced in the autumn statement. Now, here's what he told GB News earlier.
Unfreezing these tax bans. You can't be happy about the idea of people on 40,000 or above, some of them might be teachers, some of them might be nurses, actually being fiscally dragged into paying more tax. It's a stealth tax and it needs to stop, doesn't it?
Well, good morning, Camilla. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about the measures that I'm going to be announcing to Parliament on Wednesday, because I have to announce those to Parliament first, and rightly so. But there is a very big dividing line between us and the Labour Party on tax, and I'm really pleased you've mentioned it, because I do believe that if we're going to be a dynamic, thriving, energetic, fizzing economy, we need low tax, and we need taxes to be lower than they are at the moment. And the reason I believe that is if you look around the world, the most dynamic, successful economies at the moment are in North America and Asia, where they tend to have lower taxes. So I know,
but our tax burden is...
I'm only going to do it in a...
Our tax burden is the highest since the Second World War. I mean... People watching this, Chancellor, will be staring at the television and listening to the radio in disbelief. Taxes have never been higher than under this Conservative government. You talk about Labour. There was polling in the Mail yesterday to suggest that most people in this country now think that Labour are the party of economic competence.
Well, the truth is, and, you know, there's no getting around this, taxes have gone up in nearly all countries, and our taxes are still lower than places like France, Germany and Italy, because we've had a once-in-a-century pandemic, a 1970s-style oil shock. But the difference is that we do want to bring them down, and Labour put up taxes in every single one of their 13 budgets. Conservatives cut taxes when we responsibly can. So let me tell you, I'm not obviously going to tell you what measures I'm going to do, but let me tell you my approach. First of all, we're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly.
Well, that was Jeremy Hunt speaking to Camilla Tominey earlier on her show on GB News. So let's start with joining me, Deputy Leader of the Reform Party, Ben Habib, and also former Labour MP Stephen Pound. We're going head-to-head in a clash of minds. What do you make of Jeremy's comments?
Well, it's hard not to have a head full of expletives listening to what Jeremy Hunt was saying. There are at least two implicit lies in what he was saying. The first is that the government won't act irresponsibly, as if cutting taxes and giving us the ability to choose how we spend our money is acting irresponsibly. The presumption being, of course, that he thinks the government can spend our money better than we can. And I'm afraid this government has no track record of spending money well. Under their watch, under Rishi Sunak's watch, who's now Prime Minister, was Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, national debt went up by more in 2 years than we had national debt in all of time up to 2005. Highly irresponsible.
Well, but you could say that there were some things that happened. For example, we had a pandemic, didn't we? There's been a war.
It's not the pandemic. It was lockdowns. Let's just
well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, but OK, I could use the word lockdown or pandemic, but I'm talking about how they handled it.
Yeah, but
that was an unusual thing to happen.
It was, and it was a very unusual thing to lock us up. Extremely, it stripped us not just of our civil rights, but it created this financial problem with which we are now grappling. And everyone, or a lot of people, not everyone, a lot of people, including myself, warned at the time that lockdowns would have this damaging effect on the economy. So when they talk about acting responsibly, this government has acted incredibly irresponsibly with the economy to date.
It depends if you are looking at lockdown, because some people would say that lockdown saved many lives. That's what some people would say. There was obviously an adverse effect to it. So is that irresponsible? It cost them a lot of money. But what are you defining as responsible? Responsible to them as a government is probably saving the people of this country. And obviously, as a result, it ended up costing...
Well, the average... I mean, we're going to get into discussion over COVID now, but the average age of death from COVID exceeded the average life expectancy in this country. It was never a disease that was going to impact the broader population. We knew that at the beginning.
No, we didn't.
We did. We knew that at the beginning.
You must have been party to some other information. What did you know that,
It was clear right from the start, and I wrote articles back in March 2020 saying that this is something that affects the elderly. And forget about what I was saying. The Great Barrington Declaration. I don't want to get drawn into a big...
No, let's quickly talk about it.
But the Great Barrington Declaration, which was a report put out by 4,000 leading epidemiologists and doctors across the globe, advocated for the isolation of the vulnerable and the elderly as the correct pandemic response, and it was thrown out of court by the government. And as a result, we got lockdowns, and as a result of lockdowns, we got furlough. And with furlough and all the government expenditure, which was profligate and highly irresponsible, a lot of it wasted, resulting in the resignation in 2020, January 2022, of Lord Agnew, who was Minister of State for the Treasury, resulting in his resignation because of the inability of government to actually avoid fraud being perpetrated against it. So I would say this government has been incredibly irresponsible with our money.
I would say on the level of fraud and the fact that they didn't really... They just literally chucked money at anyone, and also a lot of their friends, so saying, I would say they've been extremely irresponsible. But I would refute the whole thing with regard to lockdown, because at the time, a lot of people didn't know, and most countries did that.
Can we stop looking backwards and just look forwards? Can we look forwards to what the
reason why we're looking backwards...
the nub of the question is...
The reason why we're looking backwards is because of the comment that was made by Jeremy.
Absolutely right.
I haven't quite finished my answer, but anyway...
No argument.
You've had a long time now.
Look, the reality is the Chancellor has some fiscal headroom. You know, the receipts have actually been rather better than anticipated. And there's never been a time in my life when at the end of the month I've actually had a look at my bank account and say, I've got a few bob to spare. What should I spend it on? He has now got a choice. He can actually build the prisons, which he's promised. He could actually build a proper reception centre for asylum seekers. He could actually cut VAT. He could actually do so many things that would actually be beneficial to the country. I think tax cuts would not be a sensible thing at the present time. And from what I gather, he's actually talking about cutting business tax. But I'd like to see some capital projects, things that we really need. Anyone who says spend it on the NHS, no, not until we reform the NHS.
It's just a black hole.
But what about schools need to be rebuilt? We need to build prisons. There's so much capital work, which actually creates work and actually engenders a growth in the economy. He should be doing that. But, you know, he's shown a bit of leg, isn't he? He's doing a little bit of, there may be some tax cuts to excite us all. I very much doubt that we'll actually see anything that will affect us massively in the course of our life. It'll be periphery, it'll be on the edge. It'll be that stuff that you'll come out with that they can actually refer to. But whether it's going to satisfy Ben or you or me, or more importantly, the people who did vote Conservative and are not going to vote Conservative again, I very much doubt.
Finish your point.
Well, I was just going to say, the other implicit line, what he was saying, was that it's the government's job to control inflation. On the one hand, they keep telling us it's the central bank's job to do that, they should stay out of it. And now he uses it as a stick to beat the electorate with, as if it's some kind of virtuous position to take, not to allow us to spend our money, as if we would be more profligate with our money than the government would be. They spend money hand over fist, and I completely disagree, I'm afraid, Stephen. Sorry, forgive me.
That's all right, it's not the first time, Ben.
That they should be doing more capital projects. We desperately need tax cuts. We need it for small and medium-sized businesses. We need it for corporations, and we need it for the working and middle classes. It's critical. That's why we've got a broken labour force. We've got 6.2 million people on universal credit to a greater or less extent because the labour force is broken, because it doesn't pay to work. And the gap between benefits and net pay is just too small. We've got to increase that gap, and you can do it instantly by cutting the taxes on the working and middle classes.
Well, look, you say that they'll spend money better than us. Some people spend money very badly. I know some exes who were like that, and it was my money. So, to be fair... So I don't think you can make that as a...
Well, I grant you an ex is probably worse than the government, but it's, you know, it's marginal.
But don't forget, Ben, a lot of people on universal credit are actually working. They are working.
Exactly.
But the fact is they're working on a subsistence wage.
Yes.
You know, and that's why we need tax cuts, Stephen, for the working and middle classes, not for the rich, for the working and middle classes.
Well, we'll see what he does on Wednesday, so we'll find out what Jeremy Hunt does on Wednesday, whether it's good for you. Let us know what you would like him to do. gbviews@gbnews.com. But now it's time to... U-turn on ULEZ. Is it, do you think? Now, a draft report seen by The Telegraph has revealed that the advertising watchdog is set to criticise Sadiq Khan for misleading the public on the benefits of ULEZ, which were advertised on radio and television, and for particularly misleading the extent to which ULEZ expansion reduced pollution. Now, we all knew that what he was saying wasn't quite correct because we found that out early, so I'm wondering why it took them so long to acknowledge that his advertising was somewhat misleading. So I'm asking, is it time for a U-turn on ULEZ, since it doesn't sound like it does anything that it says on the tin? Let's see what my head-to-headers make of that. I'm joined by Deputy Leader of the Reform Party, Ben Habib, and the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Stephen.
I've been a great defender of Boris Johnson's ULEZ. You know,
well, but he didn't support the expansion.
No, OK, Boris, that was Grant Shapps, admittedly, but you know, I've been a great supporter of the Conservative ULEZ. However, when the Queen Mary College data came out a while ago, I must admit I started to have doubts. Look, I hope hope that we'd all agree that ULEZ works in central London. It works in the appallingly congested...
The first zone,
in the inner zone. And, you know, I live in Ealing, you know, I live in the outer zone. You know, we're not necessarily leafy, you know, but we are in the outer zone. And I've been defending this because on paper it looked like the lead in petrol, the seat belts, all the arguments about where people stopping smoking in public places, where people on an individual basis says we want the right to do this, but in the greater good for the nation, we probably had to do it. However, if this data is hooky, then we've got a real problem. We've got a profound and serious problem. And I think that, you know, Sadiq Khan, he's not going to be completely dogmatic about this. If the data is incorrect, he has no choice. The elections are coming up in May. He simply has to accept it.
Well, because it will be perceived that this is a money grab, won't it? That's what it will look like.
Unfortunately, TfL does actually need the money, and also they need an extra, how much is it, 800,000 to replace, you know, the ULEZ, that the angle grinder gangs
the cameras,
in the middle of the...
About 1,000 of them.
You can't buy an angle grinder in B&Q around my way now. There's a waiting list for them. But look, the reality is, if the data is wrong, then, and if the facts are wrong, then you have to change your mind.
I don't know whether I've not seen him ever change his mind. In fact, if you disagree, I remember him calling us all far right.
So, again, actually, I'm going to say we knew this at the beginning.
We did, yes.
TfL produces a live digital map of air quality across Greater and Central London. And with the exception of the congestion charge zone, this map, which is updated every day, it's real-time map, shows the entirety of London to have good air quality, with the exception of the congestion charge zone, which is orange. The rest of it is either green or blue. So by his own mapping that goes out every day, he has known from the beginning that air quality is not a problem. We also know, not just from the Telegraph's article of Advertising Standards report, but from leaked information that he's been leaning on academics in Imperial College in order to get the results that he wanted. Sadiq Khan is an incredibly divisive, ineffectual mayor of London. And he has virtually bankrupted the mayoralty's office. He needs to increase taxes in order... because that's what it is. ULEZ is a tax. He needs to increase taxes on the working class, the poor working class, again, picking up the tab, in order to fund his inability to run TfL properly. It should be scrapped. ULEZ, I think, should be scrapped right across London. Not just the outer bit, but the inner bit too. The congestion charge can stay. That's bad enough. But the rest of it should just go.
Well, obviously, Sadiq Khan isn't here to defend himself, so, you know. But it would appear that the information that was placed on all the advertising, or much of that advertising, wasn't quite correct, so we will see what happens to that. Maybe you live in the expanded ULEZ zone and you're not happy with it, let us know. GBViews@gbnews.com. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. If you just joined us, it's fast approaching 23 minutes after 3 o'clock. Now, coming up, my outside guest at 5, he's a politician. He's a father. He played a key figure in Northern Ireland's political history. Can you work out who he is? Who do you think? Find out more at 5. But up next, do you trust the government to do what it takes to stop the boats? Send me your thoughts as ever. GBViews@gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry.
And I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
6 till 9.
27 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome on board if you've just tuned in now. We've got so much to get through. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Keep them coming. I'll read some of those as we go. But the question now is, do you trust the government to do what it takes to stop the boats? After a damning Supreme Court ruling, the government's Rwanda plan is unlawful. Sunak says that he remains committed to the cause, which could see flights take off by spring. But do you actually believe that? Do you really think that he's right there when he says things like that? He's said lots of things so far. Do you think he really does want to do what it takes to stop the boats? Because if he did, why on earth did he allow Suella Braverman to go, really? I mean, you'd have thought that he'd got that sorted. But let's see what my head-to-headers make of that. I'm joined by Deputy Leader of the Reform Party, Ben Habib, and former Labour MP Stephen Pound. So, Ben Habib, do you trust the government to do what it takes to stop the boats?
No, I don't trust them one jot.
No.
I mean, I think Bibi Stockholm sums up their aptitude in this matter. Last year, about this time, Suella Braverman brought forward what was then called the Illegal Migration Bill, and she said that this bill would be very carefully drafted to ensure that we could absolutely stop the boats. And I read the bill when it was first drafted, and it said things like the Secretary of State is required to detain and deport those people who enter the United Kingdom illegally. When the Act came in July, after having gone through the Commons, it gave the government the right, but not the obligation, to detain people. Also, when it became an act, there was a big carve-out for the European Court of Human Rights, allowing the Secretary of State to take notice, explicitly take notice of what the ECHR rules. And, of course, the ECHR is the supreme judicial body in this country for human rights. So giving the Secretary of State the ability to listen to the ECHR is the equivalent of requiring the Secretary of State to listen to the ECHR. So for all the rhetoric around the Illegal Migration Act, that it would give government the power it needed to do what it needed to do, it was a falsity. It was another misrepresentation by this government. The idea that now they can somehow bring emergency legislation forward that would allow them to solve the problems is ridiculous, because they've had ample opportunity to do that. But the other point is this, and this is the more substantive point. Rwanda is never going to work, even if flights take off full of illegal migrants. It's never going to work, because the number of migrants, illegal migrants, being deported to Rwanda, even at full tilt, would not be sufficient in number to act as a deterrent for those wishing to make the journey to the UK.
You say that, but who wants to be the guinea pig of the first 200?
Yeah, but...
They don't. And the idea of this plan is to break the smuggler's model. So the smuggler's model relies on people having that knowledge that when they arrive in the UK, they'll stay. If any of them think they're not going to do that, then no one's going to be the guinea pig.
But Nana, these people have made perilous journeys from North Africa, from Syria, across choppy seas, braving all sorts of elements and law enforcement.
But why are they doing that?
And the idea that a little... And all of that is a deterrent.
But why are they doing
but all of that is a deterrent.
Yeah, but they're doing that. Why?
Because... the vast majority, even if Rwanda worked at full tilt, there'd be about 4,000 people that we would deport.
Yeah, but who's going to be
46,000 came in last year.
The first 500 people don't want to be the first 500.
No, but look, there's a real contradiction here. Firstly, Rwanda is fantasy land.
Exactly.
It ain't going to happen. But look, here's the real problem. The government is actually putting two different scenarios out there. On the one hand, they're saying Rwanda is bracing. You can sit there sipping a cocktail in the balcony of your five-star hotel in Kigali. On the other hand, they're saying it's so terrifying that people won't want to go there. And
absolutely right.
Complete contradiction. However, the real problem I see here is the government are looking at the whole issue through the wrong end of the telescope. What we should be doing is to actually have processing centres in Songat, as we used to have before, which the government stopped for some reason, where we could actually process these asylum applications there and then. Look, we're not going to send people back to Afghanistan. We're not going to send people back to Tehran. That ain't going to happen. You send somebody back to Tehran and there's a bloke there sharpening his scimitar on a stone, waiting for you to get off the plane. You know, that ain't going to happen. Some of these people who are coming here are actually people that we will accept, and we want to get them into this country working and paying tax as quickly as possible.
Yeah, but,
so we've got to process the applicants at stage one.
This sounds like a great idea, but unfortunately,
It used to work. It worked under Labour.
No. Well, the whole situation has changed. The dynamics of people.
Yeah, but they're now talking about an amnesty.
The dynamics of people travelling around the world and coming to stay in different countries has changed. It's no longer the way it was. We know that something shifted in the world.
Yeah, there's now an all-out assault on the United Kingdom.
There's an assault not just on the UK, but other countries, other Western sort of countries around the world. So it's a different environment. So I don't think you can use that as a comparison. But with regard to Rwanda, it's not that it's meant to be a scary, scary place. The idea is that it's stopping you. You won't end up where you've expected to end up. So you've paid all that money to the people smugglers. The aim is actually targeted at the people smugglers. And lots of other countries actually do send people back.
Well, yeah,
and Rwanda has been used.
I mean, Israel sent 40,000 people back to Rwanda and they disappeared. You know, nobody knows where they went. Some of them went to Ethiopia, some went to Eritrea. But the idea that somebody comes here from Mali and comes all the way over here and we send them back, fly over Mali into Rwanda, is just bonkers.
Well, what's your point? Where would you send them?
Yeah, no, I would actually process them there. I wouldn't send them to Rwanda. I'd send them back to Mali. If Mali is safe, send them back there, or Togo, or Gabon. But if it's safe, send them back there.
You need the cooperation of the French there, and of course they don't.
Well, the French have been kicked out of Gabon.
No, but you need the cooperation of the French to have the processing.
Oh, the French, I beg your pardon.
So
I thought you said the French.
No, the French to get the cooperation to have the processing centres that you say.
Yeah,
and we're not in
we had it before,
anymore.
But we've got to. I think we've got to get away from relying on bilateral or multilateral arrangements in order to sort our own domestic problems out. This government has to start acting like an independent sovereign country, and to be an independent sovereign country, you've got to have enforced borders. So to start with, we've got to have a border force that does what it says on the tin, which is stop these boats and send them back to France.
And a Home Office that works.
Well, and Italy needs to do the same. Italy has a much bigger body of water in front of it.
Haven't they sent some of these countries have sent boats back to Libya and
they haven't.
Some of them have pushed boats.
Greece has tried it. It's been ineffectual. They haven't been trained adequately in how to do it.
But Italy's got to deal with Albania, though, haven't they?
Sorry?
Well, Italy's got to deal with Albania, haven't they? They can send people back to Albania.
Yeah, in small numbers again. You know, Lampedusa...
But it's still got a deal.
Lampedusa had 10,000... Italian island, had 10,000 people arrive 1 week.
I think Ben's making a point. Today, people are firing guns across the border in Hungary. There are armed gangs. There are three main groups of gangs who are actually...
Well, listen, I'm going to have to go to the news. We'll come back to that. Listen, sorry, we're running out of time. It's a great debate, a really good discussion. What are your views coming up to 35 minutes after 3 o'clock? This is GB News, asking about pro-Palestine protests. Have they become a fashion trend? As ever, send me your thoughts. First, let's get your latest news headlines with Tatiana.
Nana, thank you. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The White House says negotiations to release hostages held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza are at a very sensitive stage. It comes as Israel's ambassador to the US told ABC News he's hopeful a significant number of hostages will be released in the coming days. Qatar, which is home to many Hamas leaders, has played a key role in mediation during the conflict. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, 4 have been released. The Chancellor has refused to rule out tax cuts in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government is acting responsibly and rules out introducing anything that risks fuelling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It comes amid increasing speculation that he'll reduce levies on inheritance, income or business tax. Homeowners could be offered up to £1,000 per year off their household bills if they're prepared to live near new electricity pylons. The government's hoping the move will overcome planning objections and speed up more infrastructure for charging electric vehicles. It could be worth up to £10,000 over a decade for some. A woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermakaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and will be deported upon her release from prison. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. Still to come, should striking railway workers get back to work? We'll be going head-to-head in a clash of writers Stephen Pound and Ben Habib. That's on the way.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 41 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. We're going head-to-head in a clash of minds, and this is the next topic. Have pro-Palestine protests become a fashion trend? But just briefly, before I get to that, I want to actually read some of these messages that you sent. We've been talking about a lot of things. Joining me to go head-to-head is Stephen Pound and also Ben Habib. Andrew's message, and he said, Nana, I can't believe I'm agreeing with Stephen Pound. We do desperately need investment in capital projects. We were discussing that earlier. These, such as schools, prisons, roads, etc. However, Ben Habib is absolutely right. These projects should be funded by government spending money better and more effectively. So, agreement on there. On ULEZ...
It won't last.
It won't last. No, I want a good old scrap today. Sadiq Khan explained that ULEZ simply expanded ULEZ simply to boost the near-bankrupt TfL. When he called out, Khan called anyone far-right who criticised his plans. ULEZ should be scrapped. David, you're absolutely right, he did. Darren says this, we need tax cuts for the workers. All these years paying into the system, workers are the worst off people who go to work for minimum wage. And I really like this one about the train strikers. Because Bill says now inflation is reduced to 4.6%. Will the rail unions withdraw their ridiculous pay demands? You'd think, wouldn't you? Right, well, let's move on to this. Keep the messages coming. But you've seen them every weekend, these pro-Palestine protests, which feel to me like a lot of people on them don't really understand why they're protesting, and perhaps they've become some sort of fashion trend now throughout the last few years. And that's not obviously to denigrate anybody who's protesting for peace and doesn't like to see death, because nobody I know likes to see death and destruction. But there does seem to be an element within those marches where people don't really understand what's going on. And throughout the last few weeks, we've seen more protesters take to the streets chanting for Palestine. We've also witnessed pupils in schools across Britain take part in a school strike for Palestine. But do these younger generation actually know exactly what they're protesting for? Or is it just a classic case of virtue signalling? So I'm asking today, have pro-Palestine protests become a fashion trend, and in particular amongst the young? Well, let's see what my head-to-headers make of that. I'm going to start with you, Stephen Pound.
I'm genuinely bemused. Look, at the moment, over 2 million Afghan Sikhs and Muslims are being forced across the border from Pakistan into Afghanistan at gunpoint. Nobody's saying a damn word about that. Millions of Uyghurs in China are actually experiencing genocide, real genocide, not just a word that you throw around, actually real genocide. What's happening in Yemen, what's happening in South Sudan, all over the world, what's happening, the number of Muslims that are being slaughtered in Syria. And yet, with this particular situation, when people are calling for a ceasefire, everybody knows that to call for a ceasefire is simply make you feel good. It's not going to save anybody's lives. There's no way that Hamas are ever going to agree to a ceasefire when their whole raison d'etre is the destruction of the state of Israel. There's no way that Israel is going to agree to a ceasefire. Look, I think that what I'm doing, what a lot of people like Jess Phillips are doing, is raising money for medical aid for Palestine, working with the Red Cross and Red Crescent, and going with the idea of a humanitarian pause, because you cannot simply call for a ceasefire.
But didn't Jess Phillips resign because of
the
ceasefire?
She did indeed, and she said...
That's what she was calling for, wasn't she?
Let's do something practical. Let's just walk around the streets of London calling for something that you're never ever going to get. And I think...
So why did she resign?
Yeah, because she felt that it was important to actually make that statement. I've asked her about this.
Do you think it was nothing to do with having a significant Muslim...
It's not that significant. It's not... No. I mean, even if... Look, this Muslim voting business, you know, if Salma Yaqub or George Galloway or one or two people stood, what's the vote? You know, 2 or 3 votes for respect somewhere in the country? country, it's not going to make a difference. This is not about psephology. It's not about political advantage. It's not about keeping your seat. What it's about is something much wider and deeper. There's a sort of an anger and a fury and a feeling of impotence. Look, nobody with half an ounce of humanity in their soul, nobody could possibly look at what's happening in Gaza and want to do something. The problem is walking through the streets of London, verging into some of these appalling chants that we're hearing, isn't helping anybody. Supporting humanitarian aid and humanitarian pause would and will help people.
Well, I just reiterate and reinforce what Stephen said at the outset. You know, there are many humanitarian crises taking place across the globe in which we as a country had a direct hand. So the Afghans in Pakistan...
Yeah, we drew the boundary, the borders.
Well, I mean, that was 1947, but we had a much more direct hand in the Afghan conflict that ended a couple of years ago. We went in, we bombed the place for 20 years, we destroyed infrastructure, we came up with nothing new to offer that country when we left other than to hand them back to the Taliban. And we've got a destroyed state in Libya where humanitarian abuses are taking place on a daily basis still. Syria, another country that we helped completely destroy, but it was a perfectly functional country. We may not have agreed with its politics, but we helped to destroy it with the Arab Spring. So there are many, many places where we should rightly be calling into question our own actions and trying to do something to fix the problems that we created internationally. Funny enough, you know, the Israeli-Gaza thing at the moment has very little to do with British foreign policy as it is at the moment, except, of course, that Hamas is able to gain arms and money from Iran, and we are part of that problem, because we haven't shut that down adequately. You know, we flirted with Iran. We had that nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and we were giving them money in response for trying to bring them back into the international fold. So we are guilty in, you know, dancing with the devil, as it were, and not making a proper break. But just to your question, I mean, there are undoubtedly idiots in these marches who don't know what they're marching for. I went to the Armistice Day anti-Israeli march, and I stood for an hour at Hyde Park Corner, and I heard
Why did you go to the march?
Well, because I wanted to see what it was all about. If I was going to understand what these people were complaining about, I needed to see it firsthand. And I have to say, primarily it was a belligerent march. It was a march calling for the obliteration of Israel. The chant that went round the march repeatedly was from the river to the sea, which everyone now knows what it means, which is the, you know, obliteration of Israel, and a ceasefire by Israel, which effectively is to lay down arms and make themselves vulnerable again to a Hamas attack. No one was calling for Hamas to lay down its arms or for Hamas to release the hostages. Not a single call from the crowd. But the amusing thing was, just to your point, was there were placards up, such as lesbians for Palestine and Iranian feminists for Palestine.
Wouldn't they be the first ones to be...
Absolutely. They've got no joined-up thinking going on in their heads. They haven't really thought this through.
But listen, but the point is, though, some of those people on those marches would have been marching for peace, and a lot of the people on those marches may not have understood what was going on, and that's the whole point that I'm sort of referring to within my question, because I don't think, like, if you think of a lot of the young people on the marches, they wouldn't, most of them, I should imagine, wouldn't want to see the destruction of all Jewish people.
I think you're right.
What I mean?
Yeah.
So the point is, I almost feel like they're all going to sort of break out into some sort of dance that they all know the routine and start singing Free Palestine from the river to the sea. Because it feels like they're doing... Like, you know, parents have got kids who are like 3 or 4 with little things, and they've got face painting on and things like that.
But I think
it's a bit like Greta Thunberg never went away.
Greta Thunberg, but even she's joined in, and she doesn't know what she's talking about.
I think it's not as innocent.
What really gets my goat about these, man, I went along as an observer on the first one. About half the placards there were produced either by the Socialist Workers' Party or the Revolutionary Communist Party.
Correct.
So these leeches on the body politics, these people who have no politics of their own, who have no programme, who have actually no hope of ever doing anything apart from being a confounded nuisance, are printing these placards, and people are carrying... Do people know what the Socialist Workers' Party is, what the Revolutionary Communist Party is? And that's what...
It's anti-Semitic.
Well, there was one woman...
Profoundly anti-Semitic. And that's the other thing that's going on in these marches. There's a sinister element which has nothing to do with Israel and Gaza, and has everything to do with being anti-British and wishing to cause dysfunction in this country. Suella Braverman correctly talked about how multiculturalism was failing, and this is a manifestation of that multiculturalism not working. No one in this country should be thinking the way some of those marchers are thinking.
Well, did you see my piece in the Daily Mail about multiculturalism has failed? Yeah. But also, I wrote a piece about some of the language, as you said. One teacher in the crowd with the placard that had Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman.
Oh, the coconuts.
Yeah. And so,
that's disgusting.
But then in her defence, in a sense, those who know her literally said that she wouldn't know how to fly, as if she wouldn't understand what she was saying. So it could be the sort of thing where somebody's made a placard, she's carrying it. It just...
No, I think she admitted, but I think
but all I'm just saying is...
No, you're right. I think your article in the Mail deserves wider circulation because you speak from an entirely different perspective that I can speak from. And I think your analysis of that situation is informed by who you are and where you come from. And I think it's worthy of wider circulation.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
I actually went and bought a copy of the flipping Daily Mail just because of it.
The flipping Daily Mail?
I haven't read the article. The first thing I will do is read it.
Well,
it's online as well.
Yeah, I will look at it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, so basically, at home, what do you think? Do you think that a lot of these people on these marches, whilst I'm sure there are a large proportion are good intended, there are those who are just sort of going along with it. And I shouldn't really say too much, but my daughter at her school, she says that if she was to say that she supported Israel in any way, or, you know, show a different line towards the notion that she's not pro-Palestinian or whatever, they wouldn't have that. They would.
Isn't that terrifying?
This is a teenager.
So that is terrifying. There's no room.
That's terrifying. There's no room for nuance.
Do you know what you said earlier on? In your introduction, you said, we may disagree, but we won't get cancelled.
No.
And you said, and we'll treat each other with respect. I see no indication of anybody treating an opposing perspective with respect here.
Well, listen, what do you think? Are these pro-Palestine marches sort of turning into a bit of a fashion trend? Well, listen, let's get to our final topic, which is all about striking railway workers. Do you think they should get back to work now? Train drivers are set to stage a fresh round of strikes as they announce a rolling programme of walkouts. That's part of some of more than a year-long dispute over pay that's seen the train union negotiate with different prime ministers, with Rishi Sunak being their third one. So is it time for them to just either get to a compromise or just stop striking altogether? Because, frankly, inflation is down. And most of them are on an average, is it £65,000 a year, which is a very good salary, way above the national average. Let's see what my head-to-headers make of that, Ben Habib and also Stephen Pound. Ben?
Yeah, so, I mean, I agree with you. They're going to lose the sympathy. If they haven't already lost the sympathy of the public, they will lose it soon because inflation is down. And even though that doesn't mean prices are actually coming down, and they've suffered the same diminution in the value of their wages that they had previously suffered just because inflation's coming down, that doesn't get addressed. But sympathy will go because inflation will be low, no one else will be striking, they'll be out on their own. And actually, they may have to put up with a much worse settlement in the end because of inflation having come down. I think they're doing damage to themselves. They need to settle it. The nation needs to move on.
But let's take one factor here. This is not the train driver. This is ASLEF, the Association Society of Locomotive Engineers and Fire. This is Mick Lynch and RMT have settled. Mick Lynch, who I remember was a very, very effective goalkeeper, played in West London. He was known as the moaning goalie. He's a good goalkeeper. He has yet again showed that he is a very, very canny negotiator. He settled when inflation was high at that level. He's done very well. ASLEF have been left behind. A rolling strike for the rolling stock may be something which appeals to ASLEF, but the problem is they are now completely isolated, and Mick Lynch and the RMT are actually pocketing the extra money they've got. And I think in many cases they've earned it and they're worth it. But so this is actually about ASLEF, not about all train drivers.
Well, listen, we'll love to get your thoughts on this. Let's read some of your other messages. We were talking about the mayors, because Sadiq Khan, Della says it's time we reduced and erased city mayors' powers. They've become a sub-government, having a detrimental effect on our lives without a mandate from the national electorate. We'll keep all those thoughts coming. GBviews@gbnews.com. Still to come at 5, my outside guest. He's a politician who comes from an important family in British politics, particularly in Northern Ireland, named after his father, who has followed in his footsteps. Who do you think he is? He's on the way at 5, but my monologue on BBC hypocrisy is next.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the new working week, we are going to start off rather grey and damp. For some of us, it will be drier midweek, but for all, it looks like it's going to turn colder as we head towards next weekend. Back to the here and now, we still are dominated by this huge area of low pressure. Note the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be fairly blustery as we end at Sunday. Quite a lot of cloud around with some outbreaks of rain. Keeping a very close eye on this next area of rain, however, as it moves into parts of South Wales, southwestern England throughout the night. Could turn quite squally for a time. But with all the cloud and rain around, it's going to be another fairly mild one right across the UK. So we start Monday morning, potentially quite wet across parts of southern England, but that will clear off towards France as we head towards the middle part of the morning. That may briefly allow some sunnier spell to develop across parts of the Midlands, East Anglia for a time, but for a lot of the UK, it's going to be a fairly grey start to the new working week. Further outbreaks of rain, that may well be fairly persistent up across parts of northern Scotland. And with a northerly wind starting to develop, it will be slightly cooler than the weekend, but still on the mild side. Into Tuesday, another fairly grey picture for parts of England and Wales. Risk of some outbreaks of rain in the east. Brighter and drier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. That will sink its way southwards into England and Wales as we go into Wednesday and Thursday.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course, it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines with Tatiana.
Nana, thank you very much and good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Israel's ambassador to the US says he's hopeful a significant number of hostages will be released by Hamas in the coming days. His comments come after the Qatari Prime Minister indicated only minor logistical issues stand in the way of a hostage release deal, although Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu insists no deal has been reached. Qatar, which is home to many Hamas leaders, has played a key role in mediation during the conflict. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, 4 have been released, 1 has been rescued, and dozens have been killed. The Chancellor has refused to rule out tax cuts in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government is acting responsibly and rules out introducing anything that risks fuelling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It comes amid increasing speculation that he'll reduce levies on inheritance, income or business taxes, but the Chancellor insists next week's statement will focus on growth.
We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly.
Well, Labour have warned that cutting inheritance tax while squeezing the welfare system during a cost of living crisis would be wrong. And the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says he wants to know how any cuts will be paid for.
We've said in the Labour Party that we want the tax burden to come down on working people. It's the highest it has been since the Second World War. We've had 25 Conservative tax rises in this Parliament alone, but we can only announce those tax cuts when they can be fully funded. And if the Chancellor is going to announce a tax cut on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how he's been able to get the money to pay for that to happen.
People who are prepared to live near new electricity pylons could stand to benefit by up to £10,000 over a decade. The government set to announce the move to overcome planning objections and speed up the approval of new energy infrastructure. The current estimate is 14 years. Homeowners could get £1,000 a year per year off their household bills, although the Treasury hasn't specified where the money will come from. A woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years and will be deported upon her release from prison. A Conservative MP who was found guilty of racial abuse has announced he's standing down at the next election. Bob Stewart racially abused a man after he was told him to go back to Bahrain outside the Foreign Office last December. He surrendered the Tory whip while he appealed against his conviction. The MP for Beckenham made no reference to the recent case, but said it had been an honour and a privilege to serve. Flight restrictions are in place at Heathrow Airport amid strong winds and staff shortages. National Air Traffic Services says it's working to minimise disruption at the UK's busiest airport. There have been reports from angry passengers on social media today, with people complaining of long delays and cancellations. Passengers are being advised to check with their airline before heading to the airport. Minibuses and electric vehicles have been sent to Albania as part of a deal to return foreign prisoners. The arrangement will see 200 Albanian nationals currently jailed in England and Wales sent back home for the rest of their sentence. The UK has also agreed to help modernise Albania's prison system. The overall deal is expected to cost around £8 million, which the government says will save money for Britain's prisons. And a hat once worn by Napoleon has gone under the hammer in Paris. Its new owner paid £2.1 million for the hat, called Bicorn, which was worn by Napoleon during his rule over the French Empire in the 19th century. Napoleon owned about 120 hats, though the one worn by Joaquin Phoenix in Ridley Scott's epic new film is just a replica. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Nana.
Hello, good afternoon. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, I thought that we'd start with some lighter news, otherwise we'll all lose our minds. So, after a string of gaffes on the war in Israel that are obviously totally unacceptable, but some might excuse as the fog of war, the BBC have scored yet another own goal, and this one is completely inexcusable and reeks of rank hypocrisy. Because this was a show that would have been approved long before it was filmed and would have required some planning. In its wisdom, the BBC, commonly referred to as Auntie, put together a panorama episode about climate change and the damage that we as humans are doing to the planet, entitled, "Why Are We Still Searching for Fossil Fuels?" In order to do this, they felt that they should send their reporter, and I'm presuming a crew, on an estimated 20,000-mile jaunt in airplanes around the world to explain why, in his words, despite all the green promises, we're using more fossil fuels than ever before. Richard Bilton, the programme's reporter, whilst claiming that the world is saying one thing and doing another, travelled to Europe, the Middle East and the United States for the episode, the flights alone producing a conservative estimate of around 5.4 tonnes of CO2, more than the average a person creates in a year, and equates to driving a car for 18 months. This reminds me of Harry and Meghan preaching their climate claptrap after having taken a load of private jets, which they are still taking, by the way. Now, I just want to caveat this with the fact that I do think that there is a place for the BBC, but you can't go out of your way to preach by doing the very thing which is causing the problem to find out how it can be solved. Conservative MP Dame Andrea Jenkins said, if the BBC feels it necessary to lecture the public about fossil fuels, they should practice what they preach first. She went on to say, to add to the rank hypocrisy, the BBC could easily have used local teams of reporters in each country rather than sending one man on a jolly. Apparently, all the flights were economy. Well, that's OK, then. A spokesperson for the BBC said, as a flagship current affairs programme, on occasion, some international travel is required to further investigate important stories and provide audiences with additional insight and analysis, which may not be possible with on-the-ground reporting. So let me help solve the mystery and partly answer the panorama question, why are we still searching for fossil fuels? It's because of people like you, Richard, travelling around the world. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. But what do you think the plane is fuelled by, you numpty? So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, Could tax cuts save the Tories from an election annihilation? Now, the Conservative Party is suffering a near 30-point deficit in the polls to Labour. Meanwhile, Sunak has had to lead with a damning Rwanda ruling by the Supreme Court. But there's also been some good news for the Prime Minister, with inflation being halved. So I'm asking, is it time to cut taxes? And could tax cuts save the Tories from an election annihilation? I've got a pull up right now on X asking you that very question. Could tax cuts save the Tories from election annihilation? Send your thoughts as ever, gbviews@gbnews.com. Then stay tuned at 4:50, it's World View. Qatar Prime Minister says that only minor differences stand between Hamas and Israel before a hostage release deal can be struck. I'll be speaking to an Israeli government spokesperson on how far along the negotiations are. We'll also cross live to Los Angeles with Paul Dutteridge to get the latest on the US politics, where Joe Biden is set to celebrate his 81st birthday, and on Donald Trump, who's now 39 points ahead in DeSantis' home state of Florida. But stay tuned at 5 o'clock. It's this week's Outside. Now, I'll be speaking to a man, these are the clues, who comes from a very important family in British politics, particularly in Northern Ireland. He was born into a very heavily political household, but has gone on to make a name for himself as well. Find out who he is at 5. That's on the way in the next hour, so as ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. Right, let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Right, let's start with you, Danny, seeing as you used to work for the BBC.
Ex-BBC, 18
Hang on, it's all your fault.
What do you think?
I'm past the problem. If you apply this, you could actually, if you think about it, Nana, there's no need to send people like Gary Lineker to the Qatari World Cup, because you could just watch it from a studio and commentate. You don't need to be next to the pitch in order to...
Oh, come on. You're a footy fan. Where would you rather be, next to the pitch?
I'm getting round in a roundabout way.
That's not the point, is it? That's not
to explaining why I think maybe that on the odd occasion it is legitimate to send somebody on a plane.
It is,
in order to...
but they shouldn't talk about climate change and stuff like that if they're going to do that.
But the alternative... OK, so the MP, Andrea Jenkins, said they could have used local camera crews.
They could have done. They had an entire crew.
But that would be like saying, say, for example, the Nana Akua show was to go to Glasgow, and we were worried about your carbon footprint getting on a plane. Would anyone be able to replicate Nana Akua on the streets of Glasgow when it's your show?
But it depends whether I'm doing a piece about why do we still need fossil fuels, and I'm criticising it and talking about climate change, don't you think? So if you're doing a show about what you're asking the question, but you've answered it yourself by getting on a plane, that's why we need them, for God's sake.
Well, then you're going to have to start looking at the topic and subject of each show to see if there's an alternative way of doing it.
Absolutely. I would say for that particular show, you're a hypocrite if you get on planes and travel all around the world asking the question, why are we still using fossil fuels? It's
look,
absurd.
It was worth it to hear the word numpty. I haven't heard the word numpty for years. But I completely get your point. You know, you're talking about... You're preaching... mostly to the converted, but you're preaching and telling us what we should and shouldn't be doing, yet you're flying all around the world to tell us not to fly around the world, in essence.
Exactly, and you're asking why do we need... That was specifically the title of the episode.
It's like promoting vegan or vegetarianism and at the same time munching a burger. Exactly, it's a bit like that. And anyway, his position, whatever his name is, Robert Richard, is not the same as Nana, because Nana's show is eponymous. She is the show. I mean, I know we're a little bit of part of it, it's her show. Yeah. It's not the same. She would have to go if she was presenting her show from somewhere else. But this fellow is not Panorama.
No, I take your
point. And this was one segment of Panorama, presumably, not the entire programme.
The episode was called Why Are We Searching for Fossil Fuels? Oh. So that was the episode. It's actually called Why Are We Searching for Fossil Fuels?
But you would still need a BBC reporter to do it, or a BBC presenter.
But they actually have reporters in each of the places that he flew to.
Every time I come up with an argument, you shoot me down.
But they do.
But you're right. I forgot the BBC of all organisations.
Of all the people.
They've got reporters everywhere around the world.
Of course they have. We've got reporters, darling. We pay for them.
You've convinced me. I thought I had the one-upmanship on you.
This fellow could have provided all the continuity that was needed by doing a voiceover from the things that the people in the various countries had shot.
You're right.
Well, he could easily have done that.
The BBC could have easily mobilised crews within those regions. They've got crews in America, and they've got crews in all the places that they went. I've checked this, and they could have easily done that. So
do you know that they will have an answer for it? They have an answer for everything. You complain about a programme and they come back with some rubbish, and they've always got an answer.
What it does tell you is more or less about the unlimited funds that the place has got.
Of course, yeah.
You know, if they were really concerned about cutting back on costs, they would send, OK, we've got a reporter in North America, get Fred on the go up to the Antarctic or wherever, if we've got an Antarctic reporter, or if they're going to go to, I don't know, somewhere, Alaska, for example. Get the American reporter up there.
It was a great jolly for this guy, wasn't it?
It was, he had a great time. But also the BBC said that they've pledged to reduce their operational greenhouse gas emissions by 46% by 2030. So they could have started with that. They said all flights were in economy class and were required for on-the-ground reporting. So, you know, I would presume he has a crew, because you wouldn't do that on your own.
Well, they will have... They very often, if you do... I've done some travel programmes for the BBC, and very often you were met by a crew where you were going.
So if that's there, they could have easily had a presenter as well. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd.
Well, I think the compro would have been flying out the presenter by himself.
Oh, maybe... I'm beginning to feel sorry for the BBC.
Fly out the presenter, and then use the local camera crews.
No, you shouldn't fly anybody out there, because the whole premise of this is, why are we still searching for fossil fuels whilst you're on a fossil-fueled plane going around the world? I do actually feel sorry for the BBC. I mean, they had that awful mess with the reporting last week as well. I mean, it's just... it was awful. They got completely information all wrong about a hospital, and I don't even want to repeat it. It's too shameful and too embarrassing for them. But this one was completely avoidable. It's a pre-recorded thing. You didn't need to do that, did you? I mean, why?
She's got the bit between her teeth on this one.
And what did we learn from it? I bet you we learned nothing that we already know. Exactly. That's available on the internet. Just go to YouTube, tap in climate change, Atlantic, and you see it yourself.
Or get in a plane, and then you'll understand why you need fossil fuels.
I'll tell you what it's like. It's like Emma Thompson flying halfway around the world to join a Just Stop Oil protest in Trafalgar Square, and she flies first class because she's too old to travel economy. She's younger than me, and I have to travel economy, and it's all right. Just about.
See, so this is the thing. So I think, you know, they just need to be a bit more mindful of the optics of that, because I don't understand who was there in the BBC that thought that would be a good idea. That's a really good idea. Why do we need fossil fuels? Why are we still searching for fossil fuels? Let me go 20,000 miles around the world now on a fossil-fueled engine in a plane and work out why. Well, that's why, obviously. Well, if you've just joined us, welcome on board. It's coming up to 17 after 4. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, coming up, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking if tax cuts could save the Tories from an election annihilation. Would that be enough? In Worldview, I've got the latest from the Israel-Hamas war, with potential hostage deal brokered by Qatar. I'll be speaking to an Israeli government spokesperson. And don't forget, as ever, gbviews at gbnews.com, or tweet me at gbnews. That's all coming up.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. If you just tuned in, this is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. And don't forget, you can also download the GB News app and watch everything here on the channel. It's fast approaching 21 minutes after 4 o'clock. And it's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, could tax cuts save the Tories from election annihilation? Now, this morning, in fact, Camilla Tominey spoke to Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who said that he would not rule out cutting income tax in his autumn statement next week. Take a listen.
That if we're going to be a dynamic, thriving, energetic, fizzing economy, we need low tax and we need taxes to be lower than they are at the moment. We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation.
Well, that was the Chancellor speaking to GB News earlier, but now there's predictions of a Labour landslide at the next election, but could slashing taxes save the Conservatives from a crushing defeat? I'm asking, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, could tax cuts save the Tories from election annihilation? Right, so joining me to debate and discuss, Stephen Pound, former Labour Party MP, Ben Habib, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Sunil Sharma, Chief Operating Officer for the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, and Mike Parry, journalist and broadcaster. Right, I'm going to start with you, Sunil. Could the tax cuts save the Tories?
I think that alone won't save the Tories, but I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. I think if you look at what happened even in the by-elections, for example, in Bedfordshire, where although it was a crushing defeat for the Tories, we saw something positive for them in the sense of we're not necessarily seeing traditional or general Tory voters switching to Labour. I think what we're seeing a lot more of is those voters not coming out to vote. So I think there's something there of optimism for the party in the sense of Sir Keir Starmer has not successfully been able to take those Tory voters to the Labour side, something that Tony Blair was very strong at and did a very good job of. Sir Keir Starmer isn't doing that. I don't think a lot of people necessarily find him that interesting. And I think the bigger problem for the Tories is themselves. I think they are losing elections rather than Labour winning elections.
I think something you said there, the problem with the Tories is themselves. I think that seems to be it. Mike Parry.
Yeah, look, I think this is a gimmick. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer accused the Tory party of Rwanda being a gimmick, and it's not. It's a solid policy on how to stop people coming across the channel. But if the Tory party really believed in low taxes, it shouldn't have taken until the last moment of the last government they're likely to be able to conduct for a number of years to suddenly come up with tax cuts. In my view, tax cuts are a political ideology for the left. But for small c Conservatives, it should be common sense. Any economist will tell you if you lower taxes, you generally speaking get a bigger return. Think about when George Osborne ramped up stamp duty. Do you know what happened in that year? Stamp duty returns went down by about 25%. Common sense tells you that if you give the ordinary working man and woman their money instead of taking it as a government, the money is used better, it's more productive, and it stimulates the economy. So whilst Jeremy Hunt is now, presumably on Wednesday this week, going to be, the flag bearer of cutting taxes, it's not his philosophy. He and Rishi Sunak don't believe in that. David Cameron, Lord Cameron, I beg your pardon, coming into the government, doesn't believe in that. And they're using it as a tactic to try and bring voters on their side.
But his argument was it was all about being responsible. By the sounds of it, I mean, he did use the word responsible, and as though he wouldn't do anything irresponsible. Stephen Pound.
Yeah, it's a complete myth. The idea that slashing taxes and letting, as Gladstone used to say, the money fructify in the pockets of the people actually increases productivity. It's absolute nonsense. It's economic illiteracy. The reality is, look at Italy, which has a higher productivity ratio than we have. Look at France. Look at the other countries which have a higher tax rates and are much, much more productive. The real problem we have in this country is the infrastructure, which is crumbling. Our schools and our prisons are collapsing left, right and centre. We should be spending money on that. But finally, Mike Parry, not for the first time, has actually said something rather sensible. Because, in all honesty, if they want to bring in tax cuts, and if they want to bring this as a great carrot to lure the electorate back into the blue booth, they should have done it 2 or 3 years ago. If they do it next April, which is the earliest they could introduce it, if he announces it on Wednesday or Thursday, it's going to come in next April, people won't feel the effect of that till, guess when? The next election.
Well, I completely endorse everything Mike said. It's self-evident they should have cut taxes ages ago. Hunt himself says that this is going to be a budget for growth, and by that what he means is for the first time in history this Conservative government is going to cut taxes. Well, if he recognises that cutting taxes results in growth, then he should have cut them years ago. But Mike's also right when he says this government isn't for cutting taxes. This government is large state intervention, big borrowing, big spending, high taxation. When Hunt talks about getting people back into work, he talks about a £2.5 billion fund that he's going to set up to spend money. It doesn't occur to him that if he cut taxes on the working and middle classes, they'd be incentivised to go to work. They're not at the moment. You can make just as much money on benefits, pretty much, as you do at the median wage in the United Kingdom. We're running a third world economy in a first world country. The irresponsible thing to do is not to cut taxes.
Sunil?
Yeah, I think the big problem for the electorate, and I think it's exactly what Stephen's saying in the sense of, I think it's very hard to see what the core principles and values are of Rishi and Jeremy Hunt. I think we can all understand when people have a set of principles and values and what they believe in, and that has been something I think the party is still trying to work out. It's clear with some of the leadership, some of the people within the party, whether it's Suella, Liz, what their plans are, what they believe in. I think with Jeremy and Rishi, the big thing for a lot of voters is what do they actually believe in? What's going to happen in terms of we're doing tax cuts, which is a Conservative policy to do. Will they follow through with this? What about immigration? What about the role of big state? What about, it doesn't seem to me as if there's a clear vision, and I think that's going to be much more important.
But our alternative is the Labour Party, and they are. We know that they always their record is a party of tax. So if we think tax is high now, I would suspect that the Labour Party will put it even higher. Is that Mike?
I totally agree with you. I mean, I saw Rachel Reeves on the television this morning. She couldn't answer one single question on what her policies were going to be. She used the old political trick, well, we haven't seen the books yet, so I don't know how we're going to address it. You know as well as I do, everybody on this panel, every time a Labour government has come in, when they've gone out, they've bankrupted the country. It's absolutely true. Harold Wilson and Jim Callaghan, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown bankrupted the country because at the end, when their daft policies, which in my view are daft, that's only my opinion, don't work, they just raise taxes and milk the British person. Let me give you a small example. If I've got to pay £40 tax more a week under all these tax rises, it means I can't go to my Chinese restaurant on a Friday night, take my girlfriend and enjoy a meal, which would keep that business going. Multiply that by 1 million or 2 million people, and all of a sudden, you're sucking money out of the economy to give to politicians. And we all know politicians are incompetent and incapable of managing money.
Well, somebody should speak up for the incompetent and the incapable, and I think that's probably my job to do that. But look, the reality is, if we actually spent money on infrastructure so that the goods could actually get to that Chinese restaurant quicker, if we actually cut VAT so that Mike's food bill, which is probably fairly impressive at the moment, I should say, could be reduced even more, we should do it. But look, this old nonsense, this shibboleth about Labour putting up taxes, absolute rubbish. The population increased, therefore the tax take increased. It was not Labour that put them up. It was the increase in the population. But the bottom line about this is, will it save the Conservatives? The only thing that can save the Conservatives is what they call retail politics now, where people pick and choose in a way that they didn't do when I first came into politics sometime in the last century. That's the only thing that can save them. The idea of a gimmick now, Rwanda is for the birds, that simply isn't going to happen. Law and order, I think they've lost the control of that completely. Public order, they just don't know what they're talking about. So cutting taxes, that'll be a great advantage in 2 years' time. And a Labour government will probably enjoy the fruits and the benefits of that tax cut. Thank you, Jeremy.
Well, they'll probably put the taxes back up, though, won't they? They'll probably add some more or find something else. I mean, Keir Starmer's got plans to tax private schools, hasn't he? That's one that's coming out of...
No, he hasn't. He's just removing the charitable status.
It amounts to the same thing, though. There'll be VAT.
They're commercial organisations.
They're going to charge VAT, though. Yeah, but not all of them. They are, but a lot of them...
The Labour Party will level the country down. And the Conservatives have already had a pretty damn good go at kicking the economy and the social fabric of this country in the shins. The Labour Party will be a shade worse than the Conservatives.
Who's going to speak for the Conservatives?
By the way, I think the thing for the Conservatives, I think the thing that honestly may save them is the fact that I just don't see Conservative voters voting for Sir Keir Starmer. I think if you had a much stronger leader, whether it's even somebody like Andy, but somebody who believes in something for the Labour Party, somebody who doesn't pick his policies based on Twitter and Instagram, I think if they had somebody there with some charisma who isn't as boring as Sir Keir, I think they would have a fantastic chance of doing this. I think the Conservative Party in some ways are very lucky that it's Sir Keir Starmer and the opposite number, not someone else. It gives them some time to rally. Maybe the tax cuts, if they can do better with stopping the votes, if they can actually act on some of these policies that they have, maybe they can stop from a complete annihilation, and maybe it will mean a minority government.
Well, let's see. Let's
not very ambitious.
Let's get a final one now. Ben Habib.
Well, one final word from me.
No, not one final word. Could tax cuts save the Tories from election annihilation? The final word is yes or no?
No, but Reform UK could. Reform UK can. It's not a two-part. It's not a two-horse race. There's a third horse in this race.
We're not talking about reform. We're talking about that. It's like that. And another thing, Colombo.
No, but I wasn't allowed to say it earlier.
You're not going to say anything. Just we don't want to know. We're talking about the Tories now. Stephen Pound.
And finally, no.
No, you don't think they can. Sunil, what do you think?
Yes.
You think so?
Not from annihilation, from losing, but...
From losing,
yeah.
But not from annihilation. Mike Parry, what do you think? Yes or no?
I think inheritance tax can save the Tories.
No
It happened last time, didn't it? Gordon Brown called
It was
off
yes
an
or no.
election.
It's yes or no, Mike. We've got to run to the news. But listen, thank you so much. That's good to talk to you, Mike. Stephen Pound, thank you very much. Former Labour Party MP, Ben Habib, Deputy Leader of Reform, Sunil Sharma, Chief Operating Officer of the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, and Mike Parry, journalist and broadcaster. Thank you so much. That's what they think. But what do you think? GBViews at gbnews.com, or tweet me at GBNews. Coming up, we'll continue with the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, could tax cuts save the Tories from election annihilation? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, and also journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly. But first, I've got a very exciting outside guest as well coming. He's a politician. He comes from a very important family in British politics, particularly in Northern Ireland. He's a big campaigner against cancel culture. Who is he? But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Tatiana.
Nana, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The White House says negotiations to release hostages held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza are at a very sensitive stage. It comes as Israel's ambassador to the US told ABC News he's hopeful a significant number of hostages will be released in the coming days. Qatar, which is home to many Hamas leaders, has played a key role in mediation during the conflict. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, 4 have been released. The Chancellor has refused to rule out tax cuts in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government is acting responsibly and rules out introducing anything that risks fueling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It comes amid increasing speculation that he'll reduce levies on inheritance, income or business taxes. Homeowners could be offered up to £1,000 per year off their household bills if they're prepared to live near new electricity pylons. The government's hoping the move will overcome planning objections and speed up more infrastructure for charging electric vehicles. It could be worth up to £10,000 over a decade for some. A woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermakaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and will be deported upon her release from prison. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. Just coming up to 35 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, I'll be speaking to a spokesperson for the Israeli government and we'll be discussing the war in the Israel-Hamas war. But up next, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking if tax cuts could save the Tories from election annihilation. I've got a poll up right now on X asking you that very question. Could tax cuts save the Tories from election annihilation? As ever, email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, this is GB News via the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. It's fast approaching 39 after 4. And it's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, could tax cuts save the Tories from election annihilation? Now, earlier today, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt told GB News that he wants to put the UK on the path to lower taxes. The path that he put us on. Well, they all put us on that, didn't they? Because he said he'd only do this in a responsible way, so that he didn't sacrifice the progress of inflation. Now, there's been predictions of a Labour landslide. Well, could tax cuts save the Tories from electoral annihilation? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, and also journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Christine Hamilton, what do you think? Cutting taxes?
I think the immediate answer to your question is no, because I don't think anything can save them from electoral annihilation. But the only thing that can mitigate the disaster which will undoubtedly befall, in my opinion, is going for growth, making people feel better off, and tax cuts are the way to do it, but they've got to cut the right taxes. I mean, if they cut... to get growth, they need to incentivise business. So, well, what about cutting corporation tax? Instead of cutting corporation tax whenever it was last year, they increased it. Yeah. Look what happened to... in Ireland, Dublin, they cut the corporation tax to 12%, so we now have 12% in Ireland, and you have 25% in Northern Ireland, because it's part of the UK, twice as much. The result is that AstraZeneca, for example, will take their £320 million of investment to Ireland rather than to Northern Ireland, and it's crazy. And they need to cut taxes to benefit small businesses, which is where 50% of growth comes from, and they employ something like 65% of the workforce, so they need to do things like that. Inheritance tax is all very well, but it isn't going to affect a mass of people, and people will work round it. I mean, why does James Dyson, for example, have so much land, forestry and land? Because it's exempt from inheritance tax. So people like Dyson, there are exemptions to inheritance tax. They need to iron all those out. So people like Dyson, when they inherit, whatever the word, the opposite of inherit, when they pass on their land, people do pay, so he will pay inheritance tax if they're going to have it. But they've got to iron out things like that and cut the rate of corporation tax. And, you know, if they can throw it, they've got something like 20 billion to spend as a sort of fiscal benefit. They need everybody to feel, yes, I am better off, not, oh, my goodness, the rich people are not going to have to pay inheritance tax.
But it's the principle of inheritance tax, isn't it?
It's wrong.
You've already paid the tax once. You shouldn't have to pay it. Nobody should have to pay it. Danny?
I read an article that they were considering maybe lowering corporation tax for smaller businesses. Now, you're right. You know, the big businesses, they pay, I think, 25. Is it definitely 25?
25,
OK,
yeah.
Smaller businesses pay less. They pay about 19%. Smaller businesses. So if you've got a small business like I have, my corporation tax is less. I read that he's going to consider cutting that tax even further, which for a small business like me, that's brilliant news. Yeah. The question is can the Conservatives do anything really to avoid annihilation? I don't think there is going to be annihilation. I think you'll be surprised at the success, in inverted commas, that the Conservatives are going to have. Now, I'm not for 1 second saying that they're going to get an overall majority. I think there may be a coalition. The 80 seats is going to be dramatically reduced. Are tax cuts going to prevent people from switching from Conservative to Labour? I don't think they are, because I think one of the earlier commentators was saying that if you know your politics, Labour have got a pretty rough record when it comes to tax. The Conservatives, I think, are more prudent, and I think they're displaying that prudence with the way that the inflation has come down. The inflation is lower than Germany, than Italy, and I think France. And look at all the billions that the UK government is spending with armaments with Ukraine. Look at all the many million every day the UK government is putting into small hotels, or this third-party unexpected expense. And I think the Conservatives are
putting into hotels. You mean putting out migrants?
Forgive me. Yeah, £5 or £6 million a day. You know, that's 1.5 billion, 1.7.
It's about 8 million a day. Actually.
Well, OK, so that's £4 billion a year. £4 billion a year.
I know.
And they're finding that money. They're looking after, they're putting a roof over people's heads.
A lot of it's coming out of our foreign aid budget, so rather than a lot of it going abroad.
It's all very well removing something from one pot and putting it in another pot. That doesn't mean you've got more money. No. You still have the same amount of money. It's just that you're diverting pots or a fund from a pot to this pot.
I think one of the fundamental...
That's a Labour way of doing things, Nana. That's a Labour way of doing things.
It is, yeah.
It's like that 3-cup trick.
It's all gone to pot.
It's like the 3-cup trick, you know, that people on the streets do. And then where is it? The trouble is, I think, fundamentally, that the Tories have lost their reputation as being the party of low tax and tax cuts. They have lost that. And Labour haven't gained it, but if the Tories don't have that plus point for people to... Yes, I want lower taxes. Obviously, I vote Tory. They've lost that. So I think there's going to be less reason for people to vote Tory. And I think now... I mean, it may not be total wipeout, but they're not going to win. And I think it's Keir Starmer's to lose. I know he's in a terrible mess with all this Gaza business and his party split asunder, but, I mean, the Tories are in an equal mess too, and they're split asunder. I think it's Starmer's to lose at the moment.
I don't think that there's enough money for the Tory party to hold on to that old stereotype and reputation of being a low-tax government. But I just think that the financial situation at the moment doesn't matter whether you have the fiscal, scientific expertise as Alan Sugar. I think that needs must at the moment.
Well, OK, well, this show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. Where should we go? Should we go to Kidderminster?
Home of carpet.
Oh, there's no map for Kidderminster. John Reid, what do you think? Could the Tories, if they cut the taxes, they're going to do something potentially on Wednesday, could they avoid an election annihilation, which is probably where they're heading?
No chance of avoiding the annihilation. No. Christine is ever so much on the money. Absolutely perfect what you're saying, Christine. Danny, I'm sorry, I can't sympathise with the words you say. I can't see it at all. I think that if Sunak is going to reduce the tax on what's it called now? The one when you die?
Oh, inheritance tax.
Inheritance. I'm sorry. Yeah, old age is getting to me. I think that only suits people like Sunak this kind of money. So I think Tories are dead in the water. Labour, I think, are going to win it by default. I don't think they've got all the answers, but I think the public would have more faith in them in changing things rather than the Tories. I don't think in 13 years they've changed very much, except looking after their own.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, John. John Reid in Kidderminster. He's our great British voice. Lovely to talk to you. Well, what do you think? GBviews@gbnews.com. It's on there. There's a poll up on Twitter. Right now, I'm asking you that very question. Please cast your vote. I'm Nana Akua. If you've just tuned in, welcome. Coming up at 5, it's Outside. I'll be speaking to a very influential figure in UK politics who comes from a very important family. We'll talk highs, lows, lessons learned and what comes next on the Outside. But first, let's get some weather.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the new working week, we are going to start off rather grey and damp. For some of us, it will be drier midweek, but for all, it looks like it's going to turn colder as we head towards next weekend. Back to the here and now, we still are dominated by this huge area of low pressure. Note the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be fairly blustery as we end at Sunday. Quite a lot of cloud around with some outbreaks of rain, keeping a very close eye on this next area of rain, however, as it moves into parts of South Wales, southwestern England throughout the night. Could turn quite squally for a time. But with all the cloud and rain around, it's going to be another fairly mild one right across the UK. So we start Monday morning, potentially quite wet across parts of southern England, but that will clear off towards France as we head towards the middle part of the morning. That may briefly allow some sunnier spell to develop across parts of the Midlands, East Anglia for a time, but for a lot of the UK, it's going to be a fairly grey start to the new working week. Further outbreaks of rain, that may well be fairly persistent up across parts of northern Scotland. And with a northerly wind starting to develop, it will be slightly cooler than the weekend, but still on the mild side. Into Tuesday, another fairly grey picture for parts of England and Wales. Risk of some outbreaks of rain in the east. Brighter and drier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. That will sink its way southwards into England and Wales as we go into Wednesday and Thursday.
Hello, welcome on board. I was just reading a little message here from the gentleman's name is Gandhi. He says, please ask Danny to repeat the quote. So, and again, thank you. I will ask him. If you just joined me, welcome on board. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up in the next hour, it's time for In the Great British Debate. I'm asking, would you agree to a pylon in your backyard for £1,000 a year? But next, World View, as we get the latest on what's going on in Israel and the US.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, 52 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and it's time now for World View, where I bring you the latest news from across the globe. Let's start with Israel, as reports suggest a significant number of hostages could be freed in the coming days due to mediation negotiations by Qatar. For more on this, I'm joined by Israeli government spokesperson Noga Arbel. Noga, thank you so much for joining me. So, Logo, can you give us an update on what's happening? Because we know that Hamas still have many hostages. What's happening with the Qatari government and their negotiations?
I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to comment on ongoing negotiations about this issue, very sensitive issue. I can only tell you that as a mother, I can understand how parents of a hostage would be mad with worry for a child that was taken from them by the animals of 7th of October. And I can honestly say that I can relate to anger at the international community for failing the children of Israel and honestly falling at the job of protecting innocents in this conflict at large. And it's important to remember that for Israel, the hostages are a prime objective. Right? Since we're fighting a barbaric terror organization that has lies and deceit woven into its ideology and has deceived us in the past at every turn, the only way we have to try to secure our hostages is to bring the full force of the IDF to bear on them, so they understand they have nothing to gain from holding on to them. As Prime Minister Netanyahu made very clear, there is no place under the sun where anyone holding or hurting an Israeli hostage can escape Israeli justice.
Noga, you must be seeing a lot of the reports of people, of the protests all around the world, of the pro-Palestine protests. I, for one, can't quite understand why a lot of these protests don't mention the hostages and are simply calling for a ceasefire. How realistic is calling for a ceasefire from these protests and from governments around the world?
Well, I think calling for ceasefire is quite frankly destructive. We're fighting an enemy that doesn't care about the lives of Palestinians or Israelis. They've said so by themselves on television time and again. The only reason they would have to deal with humanitarian situation is because they want to cease fire so that they can rearm and regroup and be more effective at hurting both Israelis and Palestinians. So people who are calling for a ceasefire are rewarding the abhorrent behavior of putting their own people at risk. Hamas has virtually weaponized war crimes. They're putting innocents between us and them so that they're putting innocents between us and them because they know we do not want to hurt them. They're using that to slow down the onslaught against them and to slow down the process against them, knowing full well that if, despite all of our best efforts, any innocent get hurt, they can put them in a report so that the international community will try to slow us down by calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. Anyone who wishes to protect Palestinians should stop calling for a ceasefire and start calling for Hamas to surrender immediately and without condition.
You think so? I mean, I'm wondering why people aren't calling for Hamas to surrender. That's what they should be doing. And I'm with you 100% there. After all, this latest bout in the fighting, they broke what was effectively a ceasefire by the activities on the 7th of October. Now, I wanted to ask you very briefly, because we're running out of time, why is it that Qatar have taken the role as a mediator?
I'm sure Qatar has a lot to gain from bringing this about, but again, I would hesitate to speculate or to comment on it at this very sensitive time in negotiation. I'm sure that if the international community was actually bringing its force on Hamas to bear and wasn't giving Hamas benefits from the fact that they're holding hostages and the fact that they're abusing their own people, it would be a lot easier to bring about a deal. Israel is doing its part, protecting both Israelis and Palestinians. And it really is time the international community joined in as well.
Noga, thank you very much for joining me. That's Noga Arbel. She's an Israeli government spokesperson. Thank you very much. Well, let's travel over to America now and speak to the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Dudderidge, on what's happening there. It's Joe Biden's 81st birthday on Monday, 81. He's not the oldest, though, is he?
I think he is the oldest. Isn't he the oldest? I think he's the oldest ever sitting president.
Is he?
he hasn't lost any of his... No, I think Ronald Reagan was a little bit younger. I've got a feeling that Reagan was out by 79, I think.
Oh.
But he hasn't lost any of his sparkle. I could be wrong on those dates. He hasn't lost any. He's as sharp as a tack. He's as sharp as he ever was, Joe Biden. He's as sharp now as he was 15 years ago when he told a wheelchair-bound senator to stand up to take the applause. He's as sharp now as when he came nearly bottom of his law school and claimed to finish in the top half. So he hasn't... All this idea of him losing power because he's older is not true. He's always been and has maintained exactly the same intellectual prowess.
Oh, that's good to know. Not. Now, what about the insurrection? Because a judge found that Trump has engaged in insurrection, but it shows that there was no insurrection because there's some new footage on that's been seen. I mean, that's a bit of a head-scratcher.
Yeah, well, it is. So, Colorado, some people tried to keep Trump off the ballot. There's 3 cases now where they've tried to keep Trump off the ballot, saying that he entered into insurrection, which would preclude him from being able to even run for president. Okay? The judge said that, no, you can't keep him off the ballot. But in the judge's estimation, the judge is finding that he did engage in insurrection. At the same time, the videos come out from January the 6th, and we find that at best there was a bit of a skirmish with a guided tour. There was no insurrection. There's never been an insurrection. There never has happened, and yet a judge has found that Trump did actually engage in insurrection. It's a head scratcher is an understatement. It is an entire, I prefer the word coup, but it is an entire what's the word? Systematic establishment stitch-up.
Yeah, well, it would appear to be that way, and Trump is still 39 points ahead, which is interesting on DeSantis' home state in Florida. Listen, Paul, we're running out of time. Always good to talk to you. That is Paul Duddridge. He's the host of the Politics People podcast. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. More to come in the next hour. It's 5 o'clock. If you just joined me, welcome on board. I'm Nana Akua. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. Coming up, I'll be speaking to my outside guest who's made a huge name for himself as a politician, particularly in Northern Ireland. Then, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, would you accept £1,000 for a pylon in your backyard? But first, let's get your latest news with Tatiana.
Nana, thank you very much and good afternoon. Some breaking news. GB News understands that Russell Brand has been interviewed by police. A man in his 40s, believed to be the actor and comedian, attended a police station in South London on Thursday. He was interviewed under caution by detectives in relation to 3 non-recent sexual offences. We'll bring you more on this story as we get it. Elsewhere, the White House says negotiations to release hostages held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza are at a very sensitive stage. It comes as Israel's ambassador to the US told ABC News he's hopeful a significant number of hostages will be released in the coming days. Qatar, which is home to many Hamas leaders, has played a key role in mediation during the conflict. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, 4 have been released. The Chancellor isn't ruling out tax cuts in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government is acting responsibly and says he won't make any changes that risk fuelling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It comes amid increasing speculation that he'll reduce levies on inheritance, income or business taxes.
We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly.
Labour says that cutting inheritance tax while squeezing the welfare system during a cost of living crisis would be wrong. And Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says he wants to know how any cuts will be paid for.
We've said in the Labour Party that we want the tax burden to come down on working people. It's the highest it has been since the Second World War. We've had 25 Conservative tax rises in this Parliament alone, but we can only announce those tax cuts when they can be fully funded. And if the Chancellor is going to announce a tax cut on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how he's been able to get the money to pay for that to happen.
People who live near electricity pylons could stand to benefit by up to £10,000 over a decade. The government set to announce the move to overcome planning objections and speed up the approval of new energy infrastructure. Homeowners could get £1,000 per year a year off their household bills, although the Treasury hasn't specified where that money will come from. A woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermakaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and she'll be deported upon her release from prison. A Conservative MP who was found guilty of racial abuse has announced he's standing down at the next election. Bob Stewart racially abused a man after telling him to go back to Bahrain outside the Foreign Office last December. He surrendered the Tory whip while he appealed against his conviction. The MP for Beckenham made no reference to the recent case, but said it's been an honour and a privilege to serve. A ceremony was held at the Cenotaph in London today, commemorating the 102nd anniversary of the first wreath-laying by Jewish veterans. Service people and families of the fallen marched together down Whitehall to honour those who fought and served for freedom since the First World War. The first Star of David wreath was laid in 1921 by a group of Jewish ex-soldiers. This year's parade also marked the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and 70 years since the end of the fighting in the Korean War. And finally, a hat once worn by Napoleon has gone under the hammer in Paris. Its new owner paid £2.1 million for the hat, called a bicorn, which was worn by Napoleon during his rule over the French Empire in the 19th century. Napoleon owned about 120 hats, though the one worn by Joaquin Phoenix in Ridley Scott's epic new film is just a replica. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, also broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton. Now, still to come, each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting life, to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, I'll be speaking to a politician who comes from an important family in UK politics, and he's well known in Northern Ireland. He's named after his father. He's followed his father's footsteps, but has made quite a big name for himself and has been campaigning heavily against cancel culture. He'll be joining me shortly if you worked out who he is. Then, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should you or would you accept £1,000 for a pylon in your backyard? Because reports suggest that Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is set to propose legislation that will offer large discounts on energy bills in return for having pylons built near your home. They're so ugly, I don't think so. So I'm asking, would you? I mean, £1,000 off your bills, would that be something that you'd be up for? As ever, you can get in touch, email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. So every Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life outside the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And this week, I'm joined by a man who comes from a very important family in UK politics, now particularly in Northern Ireland. I said he's named after his father, and he's led calls for other political parties in Northern Ireland to do more to fix the Stormont stalemate, which has been seen the country without a government for the last 18 months. He's also served as a Member of Parliament for North Antrim since 2010, since that general election. Who do you think he is? Of course it is. It's joining me in the studio is the DUP MP, Ian Paisley Jr. Ian.
Hey, Nina.
Nice
Lovely to meet you again.
Nice to talk to you.
Nice to be in your show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
I was wondering who that person was.
It is your good hair there. It's great in there.
And your lovely new Barnett, yes, well done off to the side.
It's a different one this time. I'll change it probably tonight.
Yeah,
I can be a lot of different people if I fancy it. so Ian, I want to start with, let's talk about briefly Israel.
Yeah.
Like, you're seeing the situation. I had a very interesting conversation with an Israeli spokeswoman who was telling me, you know, from their perspective, you've seen all these pro-Palestine marches as well. They're happening in Northern Ireland as well, and in Ireland as a whole. What's your take on all of it?
Well, I think like most people, I'm heartbroken by any loss. But look, Israel is at war. It was attacked terribly and awfully. The thing that really gets me is all these calls for ceasefire, yet they don't want to see the Hamas surrender. I want to see Hamas beaten and surrender. I want to see the end of that war, and I want to see justice for the victims. And of course, we want to see the kidnapped folk return to their families. The thing that really gets me, however, is the way women are treated in this. I mean, there's been mass rape of Israeli women. Has the United Nations Women Committee said anything about it? If this was any other situation in Asia or Africa or any other country across Europe and there was mass rape, there would be a women's office inquiry at the United Nations. It just hasn't happened. Do Israeli women not matter? I mean, that's the question I would pose to the great and the good, and those people are very quick to call for ceasefire. I haven't heard them calling for ceasefire in the Ukraine. Well, they want to see victory in the Ukraine. I want to see victory for Israel because Israel were wrongly and despicably attacked by terrorists.
I mean, Vladimir Putin would not listen to any calls of ceasefire.
Of course he would.
And we'll probably be laughing at MPs who are resigning because a ceasefire isn't happening. I mean,
and if our Parliament had voted for a ceasefire, do you think it would have led to ceasefire? No.
They can't do it.
It would be futile.
It's ridiculous. Like, Jess Phillips has resigned, people are going... It's like, why? I appreciate you've got a point of view, but... You're asking...
And I despair for the lives that are lost in the war.
Of course.
I mean, there's poor Palestinian kids, but they're being used as shields by the terrorists. And that's a war crime. And we've got to actually call out the war crime of Hamas terrorists using Palestinian people and abusing their rights in this war. And of course, there's over 2 million Arab Israelis, Arabs who live in Israel, who want Israel to win the war because that war was against them as much as it was against the Jewish people. But I fear that what lies behind all of this is a hatred for Jewish people. And therefore, different things could be said about Israel. And that's just appalling. It's still that anti-Semite attitude abounds, and we've got to call it out.
I mean, some people would say that it's actually behind, there's a big historical context behind all of this, and that it didn't actually start on October the 7th. I hear a lot of people say that. But I think that it's now time to stop all this now and just come to some agreement rather than the aims of Hamas, which appear to be to destroy Israel and any Jewish people, which I think is totally unacceptable. It cannot carry on. So, Ian, talk to me about you then. You are the son of a very famous man in politics, of course, your dad, and you're one of a twin as well.
Yeah.
What's that like? What's that like, first of all, your dad? What kind of a man was he?
Well, Dad was larger than life. He was, you know, a huge alpha male. But he was a wonderful father, a very caring and passionate dad, and a very loving father. Gave me an awful lot of his time, even though there was a twin brother and 3 sisters, and he had competing interests. So yes, he was in national and local politics. He also was, however, a pastor. That was his main life. And I always remember my father first and foremost as a minister of religion. And he was a very incredibly busy man. He edited a newspaper. He edited a magazine. He wrote about 40 books in his lifetime. He was always busy. He was always active. And I think that's the thing that really spoke to me. But this isn't a dress rehearsal now. This is about every single day making the most out of it. And if you can live your life for a purpose and with a purpose, of course, his purpose was a very godly one. If you can live your life to that purpose, then you will get so much more out of it, because we're here to, I believe, serve God, and I believe that if we live it with purpose, we will actually glorify him and enjoy him. And what's wrong with enjoying life?
No, it's great, isn't it? But you're one of a twin brother. What was it like having a twin? I'd be annoyed with a twin because I don't want anybody else who looks like me. She might be thinner, taller, better looking. I'm not having it.
Oh, well, my brother's very dark and handsome, but we don't look alike at all. That's one thing I often said. It's probably just as well, Kyle, my brother and me, we're not identical twins, because we got up into even more trouble. Could you imagine if one week he decided to come to Parliament and pretend he was me, and I decided to... He's a church up in Oulton Broad and Lowestoft, where if I'd gone to his church one weekend, that would have been hilarious, and we would have had far too much fun when we were growing up if we had been identical. We're still very close. We're like really good buddies. He once joked with me, Ian, I've known you longer than anyone else, even your own mother.
No, that's
absolutely true.
Because you were in there together, weren't you? That's really cute, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you feel you've got that special connection?
I think there is. I think most twins do have that. There is a sense there, you know, that that's just our socialisation. You know, we're together for so long and buddies.
So what do you make of what's going on in Irish politics at the moment, though? Because you've got Stormont, who haven't been talking or standing for like 18 months. A lot of people don't really understand. Can you explain it to us? What is it?
Very simply, obviously, with the protocol and then the Windsor framework, it didn't fix the friction that exists between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom. Most of our trade, 80% of our trade, is done with GB, and yet this protocol and the Windsor framework kept friction in that trade and has damaged our trade. And the only way we could get people to respect our political view that has to change is by boycotting the political institutions. It's starting to have effect. The Windsor framework was a step in the right direction. There's other things that need to be done. I mean, it probably surprises quite a lot of people, but if they go into their local supermarket here in England, they're probably buying Northern Ireland food produce. We feed a lot of the United Kingdom with poultry, red meats, eggs, for example. 80% of all eggs hatched in Northern Ireland come to GB. So we're the breadbasket for the UK. But that trade is being frictionalised, and we want to make sure that there's a free flow in that trade, and that people understand that if we don't have that free flow, our farms will be damaged, our businesses will be put into ruination, and that has got to be challenged. And if we were in an assembly not properly challenging that, I'm afraid that it would just be brushed to the side, and our businesses would be told to go find business and sales elsewhere. Well, we're not prepared to do that. We're part of the United Kingdom. We're going to be treated the same, with all the benefits of being part of the United Kingdom and with all the burdens of being part of the United Kingdom. I pay the same taxes. Everyone in the United Kingdom pays the same taxes. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for equal treatment.
So how would you see that playing out? How would that work?
Well, I think there has to be a recognition that the changes that we've already got in the Windsor framework have to go a bit further.
Right.
And if we get that in terms of the friction, that's one huge box ticked. We then have to show that Northern Ireland will never be treated like this again. I mean, for a government, indeed, for a Conservative government, a Conservative and Unionist government, to have taken a part of the United Kingdom and said, you really don't matter. Interesting statistic. Northern Ireland's about 2% of the UK's population, yet we're over 7% of the UK's armed forces. We contribute major to the food of the United Kingdom. So food, security and all those things, and yet we were treated so badly. We've got to put something in place that shows that Northern Ireland can never, ever be treated so badly again by a parliament here.
A lot of people are worried that Northern Ireland may unify with the rest of Ireland. Is that a thing that you see happening in the very near future?
I don't think it will happen. I think that the countries are very, very different. Remember, most of the people in Northern Ireland work for the British state in some way, whether that's civil service, teachers, doctors, lawyers. I mean, they're all paid for by the British state. It's a very, very different setup. The Irish Republic is more of a tax haven for American corporations and doesn't have the public sector employment that we have. But as well as that, there is a view that, you know, historically we're part of a greater kingdom. We're part of the 5th or 6th largest kingdom in the world. Why would you give that up? You know, that benefits everyone, no matter what their views are. And I think it would be disastrous to give that up. And I just don't think it will happen.
But you say that, but then, of course, we left the European Union. What's your take on that? Were we right to do that?
Well, it was a free vote, and if you're in a club for over 40 years, as we were, and the first time you're asked, do you want to stay in it, and you actually say, no, we want to get out, I think there's something wrong with the club. And there clearly was something wrong with the club. To be fair to David Cameron, for the years before he granted the referenda, he did everything he could to persuade Europe that they needed to fix the problems, and they ignored him. And then, of course, the referenda came, and he thought that he would win it.
He did, yes.
You know, that he would keep us in Europe. And as it transpired, no, people wanted out because they got it wrong. Now, at that point, I think if Cameron had gone back to Europe and said, I told you so, you need to fix this, maybe we would have got a faster fix to the problem we've had. But certainly Brexit hasn't. There's much more that could be done to make Brexit better, and we've got to keep working on it to make sure that it works for all the citizens of the UK.
And is Sunak right to bring Cameron back then? Do you think?
It's his call. I'm not really focused on the personalities of it. But what's important is what can the Foreign Secretary do on the world stage? He's got so many big problems. He's already, as we know, been over in the Ukraine. He has the Israeli problem. Of course, he was instrumental, Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, instrumental with the French with regards to Libya, a problem still unsolved. And he needs to step in that. And, believe it or not, the situation in Northern Ireland falls to the Foreign Secretary. The Windsor framework falls within the Foreign Office. So, Mr. Cameron, I'll be at your door. I need these things fixed. I'll be back to you, Mr. Cameron. So, David Cameron will have his work cut out for him.
Well, listen, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
It's so good to get your insight. And I'm going to ask you finally then, to anybody who's looking to get into politics, young people, because a lot of people are probably looking on now, Nigel Farage is going in the jungle.
Yeah.
And so hopefully he will inspire a new generation. What would you say to any young people thinking about getting into politics?
Well, politics is about change. Politics is about wanting to change something. And the question I have a lot of interns that come to me, and I say to them this question, tell me something you want to change in your local street, in your local community. And if they have ideas for change and for improvement, I know they've got a political seed within them that wants to grow, because it's about being active and vocal for your community and for the people around you, and about positive change. And that's what politics is really about.
Ian, so lovely to talk to you. Will you be watching Nigel in the jungle tonight?
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Hope he survives.
Yes, I hope so. I hope he doesn't do a Paul Burrell.
Oh.
Remember Paul Burrell, he went, I'm hoping Nigel won't do that.
No, Nigel. What about he? Look, he's been with some other creepy crawlies, so he'll do okay.
Oh, very good, I like that. Ian Paisley Jr, thank you so much.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you.
And of course was my outside guest, Ian Paisley Jr, MP for the Democratic Unionist Party in North Antrim. Well, if you just tuned in, welcome on board. It's coming up to 20 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, my great British debate this hour, and I'm asking, would you accept £1,000 for a pylon in your backyard? Send me your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's just fast approaching 24 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. Don't forget, you can stream the show live on YouTube. I'm Nana Akua. It's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, would you accept £1,000 for a pylon? Now, before I do that, I must read a lovely message from Jackie. Jackie says, what a lovely, soft-spoken gentleman Ian is, because I just spoke to Ian Paisley earlier, makes a huge change from the raised voices trying to get their points across. Well, we're going to get back to that in a minute. But anyway, would you accept a pylon in your backyard? It's been reported that households closest to new pylons and electricity substations could receive money off their annual energy bills under plans set to be announced by the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, on Wednesday. Now, the move will come alongside plans to halve the time it takes to deliver new electricity networks to 7 years and a prioritisation of the rollout of electric vehicle charging points. So I'm asking, would you accept £1,000 pylon, £1,000 for a pylon in your backyard? Well, I'm joined now by Peter Edwards, a former editor of the Labour List, Brian Catt, physicist and engineer, and also Benedict Spence, political commentator. Right, I'm going to start with you, Peter Edwards. A pylon in your backyard, £1,000, and it's an annual thing you'll get, potentially.
I doubt I'd be offered it, and the thing is, most people wouldn't be offered it. In Ireland, where they have a similar system, it's only within 200 metres. So the proportion of the population this will have any impact on is absolutely minuscule, and it has very little effect on energy bills, which are up by 50% over 2 years, and a planning system. I didn't know this, I did have to look it up, but building electricity transmission equipment takes about 12 years, so it's incredibly slow. So it's not tackling either of those problems, infrastructure or energy bills. I'm very underwhelmed.
Well, the bottom line is they are going to put some new, using some new locations as well, I should imagine, because it's, you know, that's what it sounds like it will be. So it doesn't sound like it's just going to be alongside the current one. So you could end up being in the line of fire for one of them. Benedict Spence.
I mean, I would, if it's, you know, sort of a regular thing. And I understand Peter's point, which is that this is quite a sort of, relatively, it's not going to affect that many people. But I think it's more about sort of shifting the dial on things like planning and on just sort of rather broad, obstinate opposition to things being built anywhere near anybody. I think it's one of those things that will perhaps sound quite good to a lot of people who it might not end up impacting. But I do think that it's a bit of a sort of a piecemeal gesture, really. You know, if you're trying to sort of cajole people into not opposing basic things like energy infrastructure, then I think you're on a bit of a hiding to nothing. I think people need to be made to understand you can only really have sort of proper economic growth if you have cheap, easily available electricity. That means a sort of a constantly upgrading national grid. That means that pylons are going to go into places where people don't want them to be. But, you know, the alternative is your bills continue to go up, everything else continues to get more expensive as a result of that. But if this does go some way towards encouraging people not to vote against infrastructure that is in their own interests anyway, then I'm all for it. And yeah, I'd absolutely take a spare grand every now and then.
But why not reopen some of those coal? I'd be opening coal mines and things like that rather than building all of this. This is to support the new electrical sort of revolution that's supposed to take us all so that we can all drive electric cars. Brian Catt.
Well, but we spoke about this on Friday as well. What I want to know is, why do we need new pylons, new rights of way, new infrastructure? We don't really need. What we need is to expand the capacity of the existing infrastructure. So I strongly suspect that what's being done here is to enable new rights of way so they can monetize the 2 to 4 times subsidized new offshore wind farms and put that energy onto the grid. It's got nothing to do with batteries, because you can do all that by simply increasing the capacity of what you've got. You have to, in the countryside, you'd have to have some of these small pylons, they call it, and replace the pole pigs, as they call them in America, the transformers that are up on poles. But basically, we've got the grid we need. We just have to make it increase its capacity. If they're doing it to monetize increased renewable energy offshore that's making £179 per megawatt hour, which is what I suspect they're doing, then it's a pure cost to monetize the subsidy rackets.
So this move, they could actually increase the grid capacity without these pylons. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know exactly, but they could certainly do it using the rights of way they've got to build their existing infrastructure, the pylons, the lines that everybody will know in the countryside. You don't have cables in the ground in the countryside like you do in the city. You have wires up on poles at 11 kV, 11,000 volts. So, and if you're doing it locally in a city, then the wires are under the ground and they're going to have to be made fatter. What you don't need is new pylons. And you might need a replacement pylon, but you certainly don't need new rights of way to send the energy through to.
But it seems madness. It takes years to build these things, surely. Look, Peter, if somebody said to you that you're going to have a pylon in your backyard, would you feel offended by that? Would you be up for that, or?
I think someone else, I think it was Benedict, used the word piecemeal. I'd feel like that. I'd be underwhelmed by it. And obviously, it's a time-limited period. If you've got high energy bills, then that's for life. So getting us a personal subsidy for a few years doesn't change that. I'm afraid what we really need is cheaper energy. And I know it'd be boring if I just read out the Labour manifesto, so I'm not going to do that.
Well, give us a bit of it.
But the one thing they would like to do is set up a national energy company, because it would be extremely expensive to renationalise an energy company. You'd need to have a few billion down the back of the sofa. But they've pledged to set up a new energy company called Great British Energy, which obviously start with a lower customer base. But in some industries, particularly rail as well, having a national provider is quite popular.
Well, I would never have privatised a lot of this anyway. I think it's absurd that we did, because these are vital resources. Benedict?
I completely agree with that, and I think it's something that you're seeing sort of a cross-party consensus on it. More and more people feel, and you're right to raise the railways on that as well, is that these are sort of naturally, this is, if you like, our national heritage, and these are fundamental things that you need in order to run a country. And I think people look at the global headwinds, they see what happens when one country goes to war with another, and they say, well, which are the countries that succeed? They're the ones that have the monopoly on their own sources of electricity and things like that. That's why Russia has not, in fact, lost the war as everybody said it was going to do in Ukraine, because it controls exactly what resources it needs ultimately, and exports a great deal of it. I mean, I'm going to always bang, when it comes to electricity, I'm always going to bang on about long-term planning, long-term infrastructure, and that for me is always going to be about nuclear energy. That's the thing that I think we should always be looking to prioritise above everything else. But I also think ultimately that, again, we're talking about what is Britain's natural resources. Well, it's an island made of coal. And if we're going to sort of bridge the gap in the short term to building nuclear power stations, we might as well try to subsidise the cost of that and keep our energy policies down by, over the next 6, 7, 8 years, however long it takes to get those reactors online, burning the coal. I know it's not universally popular, but that's what I'd do.
Well, I read a piece in the Telegraph that said that they'd actually overestimated the how fast the planet would warm, or something like that. There was a piece that was telling us that they'd actually got the figures wrong, and that they've overestimated, and they said it's going to happen quicker than it actually will happen, and that is a problem. So all these tweaks that they're making, it's worrying that whether they're actually necessary. And ultimately, Brian, who would own that? So National Grid, which belongs to us, right, as a state, will be us. But then, of course, we don't have control over the cost of the energy anyway. So how will we pay? How will they give us the £1,000? Will these be subsidies that come out of our taxes?
It'll be added to your bills, or in some way, shape, or it'll be a cost to the taxpayer or a cost to the energy supply. By the way, I find myself in huge agreement with everybody here. I don't think if we sat around the table, we wouldn't disagree on anything. What we need is cheap, plentiful energy on a capable infrastructure, and we need it now. And that's it. And the CGB were doing a great job of that until they got privatised and sold off.
CGB,
and had they been left,
what's the CGB?
That's the Central Electricity Generating Board who used to do all this stuff.
Right.
They used to build the power stations, look after the grid. It was all an integrated system. So, and the basic point, if they'd been left to get on with it, they would have migrated to nuclear through CCGT gas, which is clean, to nuclear by now. We'd be well on the way.
Well, so I'm running out of time, so I'm going to ask you individually. Benedict Spence, would you accept a pylon for £1,000 a year off your bills in your backyard?
If you can prove to me that it will improve the efficiency and the cheapness of the national grid, then yes.
What about you, Brian Catt? Yes or no?
No, on principle, because it's a waste. The money could be much better spent in another way on the grid, on developing a proper, cheaper, better grid.
Peter Edwards.
Well, I think Brian's answer is very good. I think no, because it's a bad idea. We'd all like the money, but it's just ill-considered, isn't it?
Yeah, right, lovely. Thank you.
I'll take 3 pylons then.
Thank you very much. Brian Catt and also Peter Edwards, thank you for your thoughts. So, that's the question. What do you think? Would you accept a pylon in your backyard? This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. That's what I'll be asking in the Great British Debate. What do you think? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Christine Hamilton and Danny Kelly. But first, let's get your latest news with Tatiana.
Nana, thank you very much. First, to some breaking news this hour. GB News understands that Russell Brand has been interviewed by police. A man in his 40s, believed to be the actor and comedian, attended a police station in South London on Thursday. He was interviewed under caution by detectives in relation to 3 non-recent sexual offences. We'll bring you more on this story as we get it. The White House says negotiations to release hostages held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza are at a very sensitive stage. It comes as Israel's ambassador to the US told ABC News he's hopeful a significant number of hostages will be released in the coming days. Qatar, which is home to many Hamas leaders, has played a key role in mediation during the conflict. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, 4 have been released. The Chancellor isn't ruling out tax cuts in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News the government's acting responsibly and says he won't make any changes that risk fueling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It comes amid increasing speculation that he'll reduce levies on inheritance, income or business taxes. And a ceremony was held at the Cenotaph in London today, commemorating the 102nd anniversary of the first wreath laying by Jewish veterans. Service people and families of the fallen marched together down Whitehall to honour those who fought and served for freedom since the First World War. The first Star of David wreath was laid in 1921 by a group of Jewish ex-soldiers. This year's parade also marked the 80th anniversary of Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and 70 years since the end of the fighting in the Korean War. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's fast approaching 35 after 5. Coming up, my mini debate, I'll be asking my panel, should King Charles invite Harry and Meghan back for Christmas? Plus, up next, we'll continue with the Great British Debate. I'm asking, would you accept £1,000 for a pylon in your backyard? Send me your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com, or tweet me at gbnews.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akua, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome. If you just joined me, where have you been? There's only 21 minutes to go. I'm Nana Akua. Sorry, that was a very old song and it was actually 21 seconds. But I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. It's lost on most people. They're looking at me thinking, what? We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, continuing, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, would you accept £1,000 for a pylon in your backyard? Now, it's been reported that households closest to new pylons and electricity substations could receive up to £1,000 off their annual energy bills under plans set to be announced by Chancellor Jeremy Hunt on Wednesday. Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and also journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Sorry, wrong way around, that's my fault. Right, so they make it sound like if you already live near one, they might make a bigger one near you, but I suspect this will extend to other areas because they need to increase capacity all over the country. Would you accept one?
Well, a pylon in your backyard sounds like a very uncomfortable medical euphemism.
I never even thought about that.
You would need to go to the doctor if you had a pylon.
Oh, Danny, trust you.
In your backyard. OK, let's look at the practicalities of it. I mean,
honestly,
I know. And this is sorry, I just mocked your very middle upper class accent there. Do forgive me.
Do I have a middle?
Well, no, I don't think you do. I
didn't notice anyway. No. Never mind. Back to pylons at the backyard.
Back to pylons in your backyard. No, £1,000. I mean, it's going to take tens of thousands of pounds off the property, off the price of your house. Surely, anyone knows if you live near a pylon, you know, it's very unpopular. People don't want to live near pylons. And you could get a grant. What about your neighbours? What about if number 74 Acacia Avenue says, I'll have a grant, but number 68 says, I don't want a pylon over there? This is fraught with complexities and difficulties. And this is, I think, part of it is the supercharging of the nation with electric cars.
It's electric cars. This is what it's all about, isn't
How many times
it's about.
We are living in cloud cuckoo land. If they think that we're all going to be driving around town in Lecky cars in 2050, if you live on a terrace street, how the hell are you supposed to park it? How the hell are you supposed to charge it? You can't even park the damn thing.
Maybe they'll have charging cables coming out of pylons.
Yeah, in your backyard.
In the backyard.
In your backyard.
That's a great idea.
Mrs. No.
Oh, dear, I don't know. I mean, there is so much detail that we need to know about this. I mean, you put the picture on the screen of this enormous great pylon, and you imagine that coming up outside your backyard, at your back door. I mean, as I understand it, and I really know no detail about this, that if you're going to be within 200 metres of one of these things, you would be eligible. But supposing you're sort of 202 metres away from it, I think it's all fraud. But on the other hand, there is precedence. France, for example, if they're going to drive a motorway through somewhere and they're going to drive it through your land, they pay people enough money to make them not worry. Or if they were going to drive...
If they're going to allow a motorway to be driven through your house...
If France wants your land or your property...
Compulsory purchase.
But we do that here.
But they pay people better. They pay people so they think, oh, fine, it's worth me doing it. So I wouldn't, though, have a pylon for...
Because it'll be for a limited time. I can imagine it'll be for a limited time.
It's for 10 years, apparently, so it'd be £10,000.
And the bottom line is that £1,000 that they're subsidising these people will actually come out of your taxes. So you think that you're getting the money off, but not really, because it'll be a bit like... Remember when they said that they're going to subsidise people who couldn't afford the electricity because the price has gone higher? Well, that was a loan that we took out against our own money that was then paid to the energy companies, and then we eventually pay it back in taxes. I reckon that'll be a similar model.
No, so you don't even get £1,000 in your bank.
It'll be taken off the bill, but then...
It'll take you years
all
to
they
get
have to do is, what if they change the energy price cap so it's higher, so then you don't get much?
The people who actually get this £1,000, if it ever comes... I actually can't see it happening, because I think it's fraught, and it's such a complex thing. It's half planning, it's half bribe, really, isn't it?
It's definitely a bribe. That's what it is. It's a bribe.
Not even planning.
What I would have hoped by now, that pylons are getting less ugly. If we've got to have the damn things, let's have less ugly pylons. Of course, the ultimate is to have them all underground, but we can't afford that.
Well, apparently, in some places it's difficult to put them underground because there's so much going on underground.
Of course.
But the reason, obviously, why we're doing this is to increase the electricity grid, power on the grid, when we could actually... We've still got coal.
One of your...
coal, for God's sake.
One of your foursome... was it 4 of them, 3 of them?
Yeah.
Earlier said exactly that. We should be going all out for nuclear and use... We've got... Goodness, how many years of coal left underground. Let's just get it out.
There's loads of nuclear plants in France as well.
Yeah. But we should have been building nuclear plants for years gone by. They now say it takes 10 years to bring a decent one on. Well, we should have started 10 years ago. 13 years of Tory do nothing. That's what we've had.
And the problem with these pylons is, of course, they're made out of steel. Steel, you need coal. So if you're going to build all these things, it means you're going to import the steel. So because we are changing all our steel furnaces so that they're electric, so that we can't make the steel, and I don't know the complexities, but I do understand that we won't be able to make steel properly here. So that's an issue. We're going to have to import cheap steel from somewhere like China, who have thousands of coal mines.
Lord Cameron will sort that for us.
Just go back to the Lecky car things. I was talking to someone who's working with the police. The police are realistically having to consider in the future an electric fleet of cars, which just is impractical. Think about it. A cop car...
It's car chase.
Noddy and big ears.
A cop car is constantly on the road. OK, so when one shift finishes, another shift starts. When you've got these big, heavy, sort of 4x4 SUV police cars on the motorway with the armed cops in them, that will take about... How long is that going to take to charge? If it's a Tesla-type facility, it's going to take an hour. So you cannot have a police car off the road for an hour.
No.
It's crazy.
It's Keystone Cops,
It's a bit of a joke, isn't it?
It's a bit like the stool, by the way. I keep slipping off it.
I'm not going to buy an electric car. I'm just not doing it.
May I just say, Nana, that really suits you. What's that called above your eye?
An eyebrow.
No, the makeup.
Parting.
Oh, the makeup.
The makeup.
What's that? What's
eyeshadow.
Eyeshadow.
Oh,
suits
eyeshadow.
you.
Oh, thank you, Dad.
Pink. Sparkly.
What do you want? Right. Well, listen.
It's electro-charged eyeshadow.
Very nice.
Well, listen, as ever, today's show is nothing without you and your views. So let's welcome our Great British Voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. I've got 3 of you. I'm going to start with you, David Balm in Watford. A pylon in your backyard.
Can I have the ointment, please, Nana? The answer would be no, even for a £10,000 cash for life, not a chance in hell. I would lose far more if it went to resell the property. Plus the health concerns. And people don't talk about it. People, unfortunately, do, who are prone to cancer, say brain cancer. It's exasperated by a pylon anywhere near the property. That's why people don't want them.
Well, I don't know whether that's proven, though, because people have talked about cancer and pylons, and I think they found that there wasn't actually any
but
real
they wouldn't
evidence.
say there was, Nana. Could you imagine the amount of money that they'd be sued for if it was proven? They had to come out and said, it's true, yes, you're going to get brain cancer. No government would ever authorise that action. All I can tell from personal experience.
But so far,
people who have got cancer for no reason.
Yeah, but
living
so far,
near a
listen, I hear you, but so far there's been no evidence to suggest that that is the case. That's just going by the evidence. They did some tests and found that there was no evidence of any difference between people really near to a pylon and the actual effect that it would have on you. It was minimal, and you'd probably get more radiation from other things and around the atmosphere than that. Let's go to Philip Hoy in Hertfordshire. Philip, go on then.
No. I wouldn't have one, and well, yeah, I wouldn't have one for the simple reason that I don't think they're necessary. All of your people so far have been talking about two different things. They've been conflating the issue. There's transmission, which is what the pylons are, and sources of energy. And we do need new sources of energy, nuclear, but we've got old sources of energy, coal and oil. But the reason I really don't think it's going to happen is because eventually people are going to decide that, well, EV cars are not what they really want.
Exactly.
And it's happening more and more. I mean, two years ago, I went to buy a car and I said I wanted a diesel. And the guy said, oh, no, you want electric? You want electric? I said, no, I want a diesel. And he said, I've only got 2 diesels. I had one of those. No, genuinely, yeah, and it's brilliant. And I will hang on to it until such time as they come back into fashion.
Exactly. Adrian Gell is there in Shropshire. Would you accept £1,000 for a pylon in your backyard?
Well, Nana, I think there's a bit more than just considering my back pocket in considering this question. And even though we might all be whores to our back pocket to a certain degree, there is the environment to think about. I appreciate the fact that our infrastructure in the country certainly needs improving. But before that happens, we need the power and the energy to put into the infrastructure and onto these pylons anyway, should that happen. But £1,000, or actually not even £1,000, it's up to £1,000. You might only get 100 quid.
Exactly. So quickly, because listen, I've literally got about 5 seconds. So would you, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not.
Thank you very much.
Consider the environment. Absolutely not.
Thank you, David Varman Watford, Philip Hoy in Hertfordshire and Adrian Gell in Shropshire. Thank you so much. Right now, very quickly, moving on to a story that caught my eye today. Friends of Harry and Meghan say they're desperate to spend Christmas in the UK. But they haven't been invited as the royals can't trust them as a source. That's what a source has claimed. Will they or won't they come to the UK and join their family? Christine and Danny to discuss. What do you think? Do you want them back?
I certainly don't want them back, and I don't think will be back. Christmas is a time when people let their hair down from all the stories the royal family do, in particular, when you don't worry about what you're saying in front of other people. Gosh, no, they can't be trusted. They should not be allowed there for Christmas.
I hate that let your hair down expression, as you can imagine.
Sorry.
On the radio, I'm a bald man.
Oh, all right,
okay.
We'll start that again.
Treachery.
Uninhibited.
Treachery. He's a traitor.
He is.
How can you invite that pair back into your castle? Sandringham, wherever it is, on Christmas Day. You would want them patted down by security. You would want to scan them for electronic recording devices. I'm ever so sorry, but it burns his bridges. How can you allow someone like that back into the fold?
Well, I think the condition was as well that they get the royal security, so I think that's what it's all about.
They won't come unless they get royal security, will they? So please don't give it to them, then we don't have to put up with them.
Well, they won't get it, so that's it. Right, well, now it's time for Supplement Sunday, where my panel and I discuss some of the news stories that caught our eyes. Now, Danny, what's your supplement? It's all about eco-heaters.
Yeah, now listen, when you buy a house, you've got to be mindful of a few things. The area, of course, your neighbours. What don't you want to be living next door to? You don't want to be living next door to someone with a load of dogs barking all night and throughout the morning, loud music, screaming kids. You want to avoid all of that. Well, now you've also got to be mindful of heat pumps, because neighbours have been complaining. Anyone who lives next door to someone with a heat pump, and of course we're all supposed to be having them in the next 15, 20 years.
Over my dead body.
They can produce a low constant hum hum of between 40 to 60 decibels. One neighbour said it's like living, and this is constant, it never stops. It's like living next to an airport with a jet constantly taking off.
Oh, how awful.
Heat pumps.
It can't be that noisy.
That's what it says.
Heat pumps, 60 decibels.
I've heard that they're noisy.
Rattle around.
Good. Well, I will not be having a heat pump. Full stop.
Christine, this is about beef burgers.
My supplement is... Yes, I know. This is my second foray into vegan versus beef burgers. We talked about it earlier for some reason. I've forgotten. Beyond Meat, which is a plant-based food company, has revealed that its revenue has dropped by 9% because the demand for meat alternatives has stalled. Veganism is being edged out, meat is back on the agenda, and apparently the craze is smashed burgers, whatever they are. Smashed burgers, people
Flattened
love.
burgers.
Flattened burgers. But Beyond Meat have had to cut a fifth of their workforce. Overall sales of the meat alternative industry are down by 13%. Pret-a-Manger has axed 25% of their veggie-only stores. So meat is back.
Meat is back. Yeah, I love meat.
I tried some Marks and Spencer's non-meat hot dogs, and they are amazing.
Yeah, but what are they? But what are they?
Made as plant something or other.
You have no idea.
You don't know what's in it, though. What is it?
No idea what's in there.
I see.
What's
is
in
that
it?
all a bit moody, is it?
Well, what is it?
I don't know. It's made out of plant stuff. No pigs were killed. I gave one to my father-in-law, and he didn't know the difference. If you just shallow fry them, they're unbelievable. They really are. But listen, I'm a meat eater. I'm a carnivore like the rest of us.
Of course you are.
Listen, my supplement, I've got one here now. Labour have received the biggest ever donation from a female, so a woman, so Keir Starmer finally knows what one is, with a £1 million pledged by the daughter of Lord Sainsbury's.
I thought it might be Carol Vorderman.
Yeah, salesperson. Oh, the Carol Vorderman one.
I thought it might be Carol Vorderman who'd made the donation, no.
Do you think so? No,
I just wondered.
No, it was the daughter of Lord Sainsbury's who made a donation.
Well, Sainsbury's son-in-law, Sean Woodward, jumped ship, didn't he? He was a Tory MP and then he jumped to Labour, so there we are.
Well, listen, I've got some emails that I want to read out to you because, listen, guys, on today's show, I had a chat with the lovely Ian. Jackie says he's a lovely, lovely spoken man. Anita says, we're talking about pylons. My home in Wales has pylons nearby running electricity to England. I think they're beautiful, but more importantly, essential. Wake up, UK. We need our power network sorted out. You'll accept anything when the power goes off. I'd love a discount on my bills. Well, you'll be paying it back in taxes. And Terry says the Tories are just deluded as usual. I was asking earlier on today's show whether cutting tax could save the Tories from election annihilation. And according to our Twitter poll, 20% of you say yes, and just 80% of you say no. Oh, dear. Oh, well, listen, I've got to say a huge thank you to my panel, journalist and author Christine Hamilton. Christine, thank you very much.
Pleasure, as always.
And also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Well, say something.
Thank you, sorry.
Dinner by the minute, Danny.
Smiled at the camera.
He's
but
plateaued.
You're right. I have plateaued.
Danny's trousers are going to fall off.
And thank you to you at home for your company. I'll leave you with the weather. See you next week.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We're looking ahead to the new working week. It's going to be a bit of a grey and damp start out there. For some of us, it will turn dry during the middle part of the week, but then a good deal colder as we head towards next weekend. Back to the here and now, we've still got this area of low pressure close by. Still got some tightly packed ice bars down towards the south, so indicating another blustery night. Also keep an eye on this area of rain as it moves across parts of South Wales and South West England. Could turn quite squally for a time as that moves through. Elsewhere, a good deal of cloud around, clearest of the skies over towards the east, but for most, as we start Monday morning, we start off on a fairly mild note. So that band of rain will continue to clear towards France as we go in the course of the morning, so maybe a bit of a wet commute for some of us, but for many, it's going to be a bit of a grey day with some further outbreaks of rain. It may well turn briefly sunnier for a time across parts of the Midlands and the East Anglia, but a lot of us, it's not going to be the most inspiring of starts to the new week. But it will still be fairly mild, a little bit cooler than it has been over the weekend, thanks to a bit more of a northerly wind. And then going into Tuesday, still on the cloudy side across a good chunk of England and Wales with some further outbreaks of rain across the east. It does cheer up for a time across Northern Ireland and Scotland with some sunnier spells here, but then later on, some further cloud and outbreaks of rain moves in across the far northwest of Scotland. Middle of the week, drier and brighter in the south.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
We